Chapter 36. The Consequence of Confidence. Krillin resolutely took a step forward, volunteering himself as the initial combatant. "I'll go first." "No, it should be me," Yamcha countered, frowning with both determination and selflessness. "I can still be revived with the Dragon Balls, so I have more leeway than you." In another timeline, Krillin might have relented to Yamcha's logic, acknowledging the wisdom in those words. In this timeline, however, "No, I will go first." Ajax hit the nail on the head when he said, "You've been a little too confident lately. I'll fight them first, carefully, and you can observe their tactics so you don't get surprised by anything." Krillin declared firmly, shooting down Yamcha's proposal. As Krillin stepped forward, a lone Cyberman detached itself from the cluster. A profuse amount of saliva dripped from its mouth, and its claws flexed eagerly as though scratching at something in the air. An electric atmosphere enveloped Krillin and the Cyberman as they locked eyes. In an instant, they vanished from their respective positions, colliding in the middle with a resounding thud that sent small shockwaves reverberating through the air. Reappearing momentarily, the two combatants unleashed a flurry of fists flying at each other, their movements surpassing the limitations of the naked eye. They vanished once more, leaving behind only the resonant symphony of their ferocious clashes. "Krillin is doing quite well," Tien remarked calmly as his eyes flickered, diligently tracking the ongoing battle. "Individually, it appears these Cybermen aren't as formidable as we anticipated." Tien's observations received only perfunctory responses as the collective attention of the Z fighters remained on tracking the swift and intricate movements unfolding in the clash between Krillin and the Cybermen. Meanwhile, within the heart of the confrontation, Krillin's combat expertise came to the forefront as his eyes caught a fleeting vulnerability in the Cybermen's defenses, clear as day. Seizing the opportunity, he delivered a solid punch that found its mark on the Cyberman's face, following it up with a double-handed hammer strike that sent the Cyberman crashing to the ground below. Having momentarily subdued the Cyberman, Krillin raised both arms. A surge of energy enveloped him as he charged up a potent ki blast, the energy humming and crackling between his palms. Without giving his foe a chance to recover, Krillin unleashed the concentrated power toward the fallen Cyberman. The ki blast streaked through the air with unerring accuracy, impacting the Cyberman with formidable force. The hapless Cyberman let out a tortured scream as the blast relentlessly drove it into the ground, culminating in an explosion that left a small plume of smoke and debris in its wake. Krillin, strategically touching down at a secure distance, maintained a vigilant stance, his senses heightened to any potential surprise tactics. As the smoke gradually dissipated, it revealed an injured Cyberman lying splayed on its back, struggling to rise against the weight of its defeat. It was unmistakably battered, covered in burn wounds and scars as it attempted to recover from the lingering effects of the ki blast. "You're defeated. Back down," Krillin yelled, a declaration of triumph that echoed across the battlefield. However, Krillin's authoritative command seemed to fall on deaf ears as the injured Cyberman pressed forward once again, fueled by an almost instinctive will to fight. A disheartening realization settled on Krillin as the distasteful choice he was compelled to make became increasingly clear. While Krillin has consistently avoided unnecessary bloodshed whenever possible, it did not mean he wouldn't make the tough call when push came to shove. Krillin decided to extend the Cyberman one final chance. If it continues to persist in its advance, then the Cyberman is leaving him with no other alternative. Krillin's eyes honed in on his enemy. Despite its tenacity, the Cyberman was unmistakably weaker than before, displaying a visible limp as it darted forward. Krillin closed the distance with a rapid dash, meeting the Cyberman in the middle. In a fluid motion, his hands executed a quick snap, followed by a lightning-quick roundhouse kick that landed resoundingly. The Cyberman, overwhelmed by the force, was sent sprawling once again, propelled across the terrain by the momentum of the strike. As the Cyberman came to a stop, Krillin, standing tall and imposing, addressed his fallen adversary. "This is your last chance to back down." The Cyberman did not, in fact, back down, instead rising defiantly from the ground with a single-minded determination to kill. It was as if the creature did not comprehend his words, which is entirely possible, now that Krillin really thinks about it. However, he's not going to dwell on it too deeply. With a resolute sigh, blue light illuminated Krillin's face as he began channeling the Turtle School's signature move. As the Cyberman charged towards him, Krillin unleashed his attack, a torrent of azure energy surging forward from his hands. Kamehameha. The Cyberman collided headfirst into the oncoming attack, its silhouette consumed by the radiant beam as it faced the full force of the Kamehameha. The beam tore through the battlefield as it continued along its trajectory as if it had never impacted the Cyberman. When the dust settled, no traces of the Cyberman's presence lingered, having been erased from existence. Amidst the aftermath, The echoes of slow clapping disrupted the silence from none other than Nappa. His voice carried begrudging acknowledgement of Krillin's victory. Dramatic finish. Well done. Next. Yamcha, his enthusiasm reignited with Krillin's effortless victory, allowed a cocky smirk to grow as he strode forth, practically itching to prove his mettle. Yamcha gave Krillin a high five as he passed, congratulating his friend on his victory. From Nappa's side, another Cyberman, equally savage in demeanor, broke rank. With a casual yet deliberate gesture, Yamcha beckoned the creature with a single hand in a gesture universally understood as "bring it on." The infuriated Cyberman hurled itself at Yamcha, momentarily vanishing from view as it rapidly closed the distance. In contrast to Krillin, Yamcha decided to stand his ground, his focus unwavering and his senses sharp. With meticulous precision, he intercepted the Cyberman's initial assault, catching the creature's attack with his forearm. A low growl emanated from the Cyberman as it shifted tactics, unleashing a flurry of strikes in quick succession. Yamcha effortlessly evaded the onslaught, performing a nimble dance as he weaved back and forth around the strikes. After each dodge, Yamcha strategically retreated by taking calculated steps backward to gauge the Cyberman's attack patterns and anticipate its subsequent moves. Amidst the chaotic fray, the Cyberman employed an unexpected and grotesque tactic. With an abrupt and unnerving motion, it directed its swollen head downward, unleashing a spray of corrosive acid. Yamcha's eyes widened in response as he threw himself out of harm's way, executing a nimble roll that narrowly brought him out of the trajectory of the corrosive liquid. As Yamcha regained his footing, he narrowed his eyes. He hates to admit it, but Ajax had been right. His confidence had nearly cost him the match. The playful smirk on Yamcha's face faded and a focused intensity replaced it. It's time to get serious. From this moment forward, the Cyberman won't be able to do anything. Yamcha raised his right forearm directly upwards, perfectly perpendicular to the ground. Spirit Ball. At that moment, a luminous orb of ki materialized, hovering above his open palm. With a resounding yell, Yamcha slashed his arms downwards and sent the spirit ball soaring through the air, zeroing in on the Cyberman with remarkable speed and precision. Yamcha watched as the spirit ball crashed into the charging Cyberman's face. To his satisfaction, the sphere did not disperse upon contact. Instead, it whirled a short distance away, maintaining its presence on the battlefield. Yamcha had been quite proud when he finally figured out the method to prevent the spirit ball from dispersing upon impact without reducing its power. This additional capability of his attack had unlocked an entirely new realm of possibilities. The fact of the matter is, if he can reuse the spirit ball, then there's nothing stopping him from hammering his enemies back and forth in the air like a badass. Or, get this, simultaneously have two spirit balls at the same time. Capitalizing on the Cyberman's disorientation, Yamcha swiftly re-entered melee range. His battle cry resonated as he unleashed the next phase of his combo. Neo Wolf Fong Fist. A torrent of strikes rained down on the Cyberman, each strike of Yamcha's Neo Wolf Fong Fist forming a spectral wolf in the air, an ethereal manifestation of the technique. The Cyberman, helpless before Yamcha's onslaught, was sent hurtling backward, green blood spurting from its mouth as a testament to the ferocity of the martial technique. However, Yamcha's onslaught was not over. With deft flicks of his wrist, the spirit ball, previously hovering nearby, slammed itself into the ground and tunneled beneath the earth, disappearing from view. Simultaneously, Yamcha leaped gracefully into the air for the climax of his assault, blue light coalescing in his hands as he charged his final move. Upon hitting the ground, the battered and disoriented Cyberman screeched as the spirit ball, having drilled beneath it, resurfaced with perfect timing. It ascended with great momentum, colliding forcefully with the Cyberman's back and propelling the creature skyward helplessly, right into Yamcha's line of fire. With a swift thrust of his arms, Yamcha seamlessly concluded his combo, unleashing the full force of his final move and sealing the Cyberman's fate. Kamehameha. Yamcha's formidable Kamehameha, at least on par if not more potent than Krillin's, crashed into the already battered Cyberman, instantly wiping it from the face of the earth. True to Yamcha's promise, the Cyberman had no further opportunity to react. In this bout, Yamcha had unmistakably emerged victorious. Suspended in the air and basking in the glory of his victory, Yamcha cast a calculated gaze upon the remaining four Cybermen. With a jerk of his arms and a smirk, Yamcha redirected his still-active Kamehameha toward Nappa and the cluster of Cybermen. The pulsating energy surged, leaving behind a curved trail as it homed in on its new targets. The final image etched into Yamcha's vision before the Kamehameha landed was Nappa cocking an unimpressed eyebrow. Then, the explosion shook the ground. Yamcha landed lightly, observing the aftermath with caution like Ajax had advised him. As the dust gradually settled, the devastation and carnage wrought by Yamcha's attack came into view. 2 Cybermen had died, their grotesque forms contorted with one of the two. Not exactly in one piece. Another Cyberman, somewhat hurt and lightly singed, managed to endure, having managed to take a defensive stance in time. In stark contrast, Nappa emerged virtually unscathed, standing amidst the smoldering earth with a single, casually outstretched palm with only a few superficial cuts on his skin. As the dust cleared further, an unexpected scene unfolded. From behind Nappa, another Cyberman dropped nonchalantly to the ground, appearing even less affected by the explosion. The creature strolled with a slight swagger out from the Scion General's shadow. Sensing the movement behind him, Nappa turned, and a wry smile crept across his face as he recognized who it was. Somehow, he was not surprised. Pretty smart, Alpha, knowing that the safest place is behind my back. Alpha responded to Nappa's words with a victorious peace sign, a playful gesture greatly at odds with its menacing appearance. Seizing the moment when all eyes were on it, Alpha struck a pose reminiscent of a rock star reaching the climax of his signature performance, wearing an expression of supreme satisfaction, as if basking in the applause of an ecstatic audience. Nappa gave Alpha a dry look. Nappa then turned to Vegeta, checking if his prince was all right. However, Nappa's mouth snapped shut immediately at the sight he saw. Meanwhile, Yamcha, having successfully achieved a small victory, sported a triumphant grin. He turned towards the rest of the Z fighters, satisfaction glinting in his eyes, and offered a quick thumbs up. "We're up by 2. Hey you." Yamcha turned and found himself the target of Vegeta's piercing stare. The Scion Prince, devoid of any hint of amusement, had opened his eyes with a severity that swiftly dispelled Yamcha's triumphant mood. Although Vegeta continued to lean casually against the upturned piece of rock, the stare he directed at Yamcha was anything but. Suddenly apprehensive under Vegeta's undivided attention, Yamcha swallowed his nervousness before parting his lips to reply. He stammered, voice quivering with uncertainty and fear, What? Are you deaf? And no? Did Nappa not specify this was a one-on-one deathmatch? The Scion Prince's gaze turned terrifyingly cold. Did you believe that taking a cheap shot and killing the other two makes you strong? Yamcha involuntarily took a half-step back at those blunt words, his frame shaking. All the bravado that had previously adorned him like armor dissipated, leaving behind only vulnerability in its wake. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of Yamcha's stomach as he realized he had stepped into some deep, deep shit. The ground began to tremble from Vegeta's sheer presence as the Prince of all Science pushed off the rock he had been leaning against, standing upright. Then, with deliberate slowness, he extended a single finger, pointing it directly at Yamcha with a chilling finality like a god delivering divine judgment. Since rules and honor clearly mean nothing to you, then let's dispense with the formalities and proceed straight to the main event you so eagerly desired, your execution. In an instant, Yamcha's eyes were blown wide open, the color draining from his face at the ominous decree. A cold shiver raced down his spine as he urgently began to backtrack with increasing speed. Sensing the imminent danger, Krillin and Tien surged forward in an attempt to intercept the unfolding disaster. Simultaneously, Kairatsu harnessed his telekinetic abilities, straining to drag Yamcha out of harm's way. However, all of their efforts made not a single difference. With a cruel nonchalance, Vegeta executed his judgment with a single flick of his finger. The air around Yamcha crackled with energy, and Yamcha screamed in agony as an enormous explosion that he had no hopes of evading engulfed him. The destructive force of the blast sent shockwaves across the battlefield, hurling Krillin and Tien backward with brutal intensity. Tien, agile as ever, managed to skid across the ground, retaining some semblance of balance. In contrast, Krillin tumbled through the air, somersaulting head over heels in the chaotic aftermath. As the explosion cleared, Yamcha lay lifeless in a crater, his form splayed on its side. The once confident warrior, who had only moments ago reveled in a small victory against the Cybermen, now bore the consequence of his confidence. A collective gasp of shock, horror, and disbelief escaped the Z fighters. Yamcha had not been weak. In fact, Yamcha had been one of their reliable fighters, but he now lay lifeless in the crater, his life casually extinguished by a mere flick of the enemy's finger. The abruptness of Yamcha's demise paralyzed them as they struggled to make sense of the incomprehensible display of power. Distinctly, they felt the cold wings of despair flutter upon their shoulders. Piccolo, usually stoic and composed, felt a great pressure settle upon him. That wasn't a battle. As Vegeta had said, it had been an execution. Victory had been an impossibility. Piccolo felt himself erupt in cold sweat as he stared at Vegeta, whose figure was becoming less like an enemy and more like a force of nature, capable of ending them all in the blink of an eye. Nappa interjected with a light-hearted whistle that broke everyone out of their stupor, drawing their attention to the scion. He gave Vegeta a teasing grin. "You haven't used dirty fireworks in a while, Vegeta." Vegeta's narrowed eyes, sharp as a dagger, zeroed in on his partner, a silent warning for Nappa to tread carefully. Right, we're not calling it that." Nappa hastily corrected himself and attempted to salvage his mistimed jest with an awkward thumbs up. Nappa's attempt at humor was met with stoic silence from Vegeta, who remained unamused by Nappa's playful banter. However, the Scion Prince ultimately shifted his gaze away and seamlessly returned to his nonchalant pose. Leaning against the slab of rock once more, he closed his eyes, as if nothing of note had occurred. Already, Yamcha's execution had been dismissed as a mere afterthought. In the ensuing dead silence, Vegeta's command resounded with chilling clarity, each syllable echoing like a foreboding bell tolling for their imminent death. Next. Chapter 37. Kairatsu is kind of a badass. After the initial shock subsided, each Z fighter showed fury at the loss of their comrade. Piccolo, however, stood as an exception. Though he too expressed anger, his ire was not for Yamcha but rather aimed at him. While he did not harbor any personal connection to Yamcha and wouldn't have shown any sympathy even if he did, the strategic disadvantage resulting from such an unnecessary loss had irked him. They could have stalled by taking their sweet time with the one-on-one matches, but this idiot. Damn it. Despite the pressure from Vegeta's presence, Piccolo surveyed the scene with a calculating gaze. He is the de facto leader of this sorry bunch and unlike them, he can't afford to lose his head. Climbing to his feet from the aftermath of the explosion that had forcefully blown him back, Krillin clenched his fists tightly, his eyes ablaze with a mixture of grief and fury. The loss of Yamcha had ignited a fire within him, propelling him forward with a yell that echoed across the desolate wasteland. As he charged, his determination to avenge his friend radiated from every fiber of his being. Piccolo snapped his head towards Krillin. "Stop, you idiot." In the end, it wasn't Piccolo's words that halted Krillin, it was Vegeta's. "Do you want to die?" Vegeta, still leaning casually against the rock, had kept his eyes closed, but the intensity of his tone spoke for itself. "You already had your match. If you wish to tarnish the honor of the subsequent fights, then go ahead. I will end you too." The moment Vegeta's voice cut through the air, the Scion Prince's sheer killing intent materialized like an invisible force pressing against Krillin. Krillin immediately braked and something like the screech of tires on pavement filled the air as his heels slid on the ground at maximum friction, doing their best to halt his advance. With gritted teeth, Krillin reluctantly took a step back, the fire in his eyes dimmed by the bitter acknowledgement of his limitations. Deep within, he knew that if he had taken another step forward, he would have shared the same fate as Yamcha. The other Z fighters, still reeling from the overwhelming power of the Scion Prince, could do nothing more than stand there, heads down in uneasy silence from their helplessness. Assuming command, Nappa swiftly restored order, steering the events back in alignment with his original plan. "All right, let's keep this moving. Who's going up next?" Kairatsu, with his small figure, glided to the forefront, tears swirling in his eyes but his face twisted with anger. Though he hadn't spent as much time with Yamcha as some of the others, the loss had still hit him hard. After all, they had just spent nearly a full year of training together. The unexpected and senseless death of a comrade ignited a deep-seated rage within him. Kairatsu's petite form trembled with both grief and fury as he locked eyes with the opposing injured Cyberman. He knew precisely who to take his anger out on. Determination blazed through the tears in his eyes as his form lit up in a storm of telekinetic power. And so, the fight began, if you could even call it that. Immediately, Kairatsu took to the skies, simultaneously dodging the Cyberman's initial attack and securing the high ground. Hovering above, he began to channel a powerful Dodone ray in his small hands, the energy sparking and intensifying. As the Cyberman lunged upwards in anticipation of an easy strike against the floating warrior, Kairatsu unleashed a scattering of Dodone ray with pinpoint accuracy. Each beam shot forth, colliding with the Cyberman's face, torso and limbs, momentarily halting its ascent. The creature recoiled from the unexpected attack, howling in pain as the energy blast penetrated through its grotesque features. However, Kairatsu wasn't done. With a surge of telekinetic force, he seized control of the Cyberman mid-air, manipulating its movements like a puppet on strings. The injured creature struggled against the unseen force, unable to break free from Kairatsu's iron psychic grip. In a display of raw telekinetic might, Kairatsu, his small frame glowing with a blue aura, twisted the Cyberman's neck in a horrifying full 360 degrees. The sickening crack echoed through the battlefield as the Cyberman's body grew limp. Fueled by his rage, Kairatsu's aggression surged to new heights. With an abrupt motion, He summoned his telekinetic prowess once more, violently tearing the Cyberman's head clean off its shoulders. The detached head, now a gruesome trophy of Kairotsu's vengeance, soared through the air before landing with a thud and a bounce at Nappa's feet. The sudden and brutal execution left an eerie silence hanging over the battlefield. The Z-fighters gaped in silent awe as Kairotsu turned the tables. No, absolutely crushed the Cyberman. Kairotsu, his hands still raised, snarled. How's that for an execution? Nappa raised an eyebrow and whistled, thoroughly impressed at the spectacle. Fatality. Someone's feeling a little aggressive today. Fantastic finish, midget. You're more powerful than your power level suggests. Next. Kairotsu's face twisted with frustration as he was casually disregarded. Teeth grinding, he drifted back to the group. Nappa nodded toward Alpha, the sole remaining Cyberman, before turning his attention to Gohan, the last combatant who had yet to fight. It's your turn, kid. Show us what you've got. Gohan had long been dreading this precise moment, where he had to face the Cyberman solo without any allies for assistance or support. He wrung his hands, the shadow of trepidation hanging over him at his debut fight. At that moment, Gohan felt Piccolo's firm grip landing on his shoulders, his mentor's touch acting as a steady anchor that calmed down the internal chaos that churned within him. He met Piccolo's reassuring gaze. Gohan, remember your training and what I taught you. Use your ki sense, don't forget to dodge, and if you do, this will become no different than any of our past spars. Most importantly, Gohan, remember that you are not weak. With Piccolo's words echoing in his ears, Gohan took a deep breath and stepped forward, his eyes focused on Alpha, who had already struck a pose. While residual nerves and a tinge of fear lingered, Piccolo's words had greatly settled his nerves. He positioned himself across from Alpha, adopting a combat stance, though a subtle tremor betrayed his internal turmoil. Nappa frowned as he observed the entire series of events. Hey, you're Kakarot's kid, right?
Yeah. Gohan nodded.
You're a scion, where's your spine? Why are you so scared of a fight? Nappa demanded, impatient and disappointed. Though Alpha was stronger than the average Cyberman, as far as he could tell, there was no significant gulf of power between the two. He just couldn't understand why a scion would have such nervousness about a balanced battle. TT, this is my first real battle, Mr. Nappa. Wait, your first battle ever? A hint of disbelief crept onto Nappa's expression at the admission. Yes. How? What have the Namekian been teaching you all this TI? Wait, what did you call me? Mr. Nappa? At the confirmation, Nappa appeared to momentarily space out, his eyes losing focus as if caught in memories. After a brief moment, Nappa abruptly blinked, snapping himself out of the momentary trance and lightly shaking his head. It's been quite some time since someone has called me that, he mused. His eyes regained their full clarity, and he tilted his head as if only just realizing he was looking at something fascinating. What's your name, kid?
Gohan.
And how old are you, Gohan? I'm 5, Mr. Nappa. And yet, without a single battle to your name at the age of 5, you're already just as, if not more, powerful than Raditz. What potential, Nappa remarked, his tone shifting from stern to contemplative. He studied Gohan intently, his fingers stroking his chin as he assessed the young boy before him, nodding approvingly. Turning his attention back to Alpha, he issued a new directive. Alpha, this is no longer a deathmatch. Don't hold back, but don't kill him either. The change in Nappa's tone and instructions caught everyone off guard. Even Alpha was surprised, turning to look at Nappa with an incredulous expression. Behind Gohan, Piccolo's eyes narrowed in suspicion as he attempted to decipher Nappa's intentions. Despite being taken aback by the unexpected change of rules, Gohan couldn't help but feel relief as he took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He knew that nothing had truly changed and he still couldn't afford to let fear paralyze him. He could feel Piccolo's stern gaze on his back, and Gohan found solace and encouragement in the knowledge that his mentor believed in his capabilities. A short distance away, Vegeta lazily opened one eye, his eyebrows raised as he observed the shift in the status quo. Nappa, arms crossed, prepared to pay considerably closer attention to this battle than the preceding ones. Begin when ready. Drawing on the ingrained lessons from his training, the young scion charged his ki, the energy enveloping him crackling in a manifestation of power. Gohan's eyes gleamed with determination as he and Alpha launched themselves at each other, the first strikes exchanged with a blur of speed. Gohan, despite his initial fear, showcased remarkable agility, his small form dodging and weaving around Alpha's attacks with nimble movements. Alpha, visibly frustrated by his elusive target, grew more aggressive, launching a flurry of strikes and kicks that forced Gohan to focus on defense. Piccolo, watching closely, recognized that Gohan was falling into old habits. "Gohan, counterattack," he telepathically urged, reaching into the young Scion's mind. Upon hearing Piccolo's voice echoing in his mind, Gohan hesitated for a moment before gathering his resolve and seizing an opening with newfound determination. As Alpha lunged forward with a powerful kick, Gohan ducked beneath the attack and swiftly retaliated with a well-placed punch to the Cyberman's midsection. To Gohan's shock, Alpha tanked his strike like a champ, barely wincing. Gohan's lips formed a grim line as he twisted to avoid Alpha's subsequent strikes, occasionally countering with blows of his own as the fight continued. As Piccolo witnessed Gohan continue to execute well-timed counterattacks, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment and, dare he admit it, imperceivable traces of pride. A year ago, Gohan had been a pathetic, useless crybaby, but under Piccolo's guidance, he had evolved into a warrior capable of holding his own against foes of Raditz level. The current Gohan, Piccolo mused, would be able to effortlessly shred both Piccolo Sr. and the younger Goku to pieces, even if they faced him together. If Gohan had a little more combat experience, he might be able to replicate that feat with Piccolo and Goku of a year ago. 1 year, that was all it took. Piccolo smirked. God, he's so King good at teaching. He can see why Kami is into this shit. After a while, Alpha suddenly stopped the fight, putting an end to its attacks. It paused in mid-air a slight distance away as if frozen in time, prompting Gohan to stop as well, confused at the sudden change. Alpha started to slowly drift toward Gohan, devoid of any aggression and without any combat stance, its arms loosely hanging by its side. Though he was well aware of the acid tactic that was employed against Yamcha earlier, Gohan had no idea whether this unpredictable change in behavior was the beginning of a similar strategy or the precursor to something else. With mounting nervousness, he maintained his defensive stance, warily watching as the Cyberman drew nearer. Alpha came to a halt just a foot away from Gohan, staring into Gohan's eyes. Out of nowhere, Alpha feigned an aggressive move with a mischievous grin, causing Gohan to involuntarily flinch in response. However, it was nothing but a small feint, a mere illusion of an attack more fitting on a playground bully. In the split second when Gohan's guard was down at the realization that he had been punked, Alpha abruptly and unexpectedly bitch-slapped Gohan across the face. The audible crack of the slap can be heard all the way on the ground, reaching the stunned Z-fighters and Nappa, even catching Vegeta's attention. Gohan staggered back in the air, holding his cheek in surprise and confusion. As the young Scion stared in shock, the Cyberman grabbed Gohan's hand, and skillfully molded it into a fist before bringing Gohan's clenched fist toward its own hideous face demonstratively, as if showing, "Look, this is how you throw a punch." Alpha released its grip on Gohan's hand with a disgusted flourish, giving the young Scion a dry, half-lidded look as it floated backward, shaking its head in disappointment. Gohan's eyes twitched as he rubbed his stinging cheek, embarrassed and indignant as anger bubbled up from within him like a geyser. He knew how to throw a punch, for Kami's sake. Mr. Piccolo had taught him that much, and he did not need to be patronized like this by some. Gohan struggled to find an appropriate insult, unripe onion. Fueled by his frustration, Gohan re-engaged Alpha in a fierce battle, streaking through the air with a resounding bang. The intensity of their confrontation escalated, each movement leaving dynamic afterimages in the air. Chapter 38, You're Just a Shit Teacher. However, Nappa couldn't hold it in any longer and blew his King lid. Nappa's forehead veins pulsated as he pointed an accusatory finger at Piccolo, launching an expletive-laden tirade at Piccolo. What the CK, Namekian? Look at this bullshit. He just got humiliated by a Cyberman. What kind of useless shit are you teaching Gohan? You're just wasting his potential. Piccolo's antennae twitched with irritation as the Piccolo button was pushed, and he shot Nappa an affronted and utterly offended look in response to the blatant disrespect. Excuse me. What hell did you just say to me? I'm what? I dare you to say that again. You're wasting his potential. Nappa spat out through gritted teeth. Look at him. Where's the ferocity of a Scion? He's being so pussyfooted because all he does is try to dodge. A Scion should be relentless and overpowering, not dancing around like a scared rabbit. Dodging is an important skill. Not if that's all he does, Namekian. What the hell do you know? I know that you can't win a fight by only dodging. Nappa's voice boomed, reverberating across the battlefield. Their argument escalated, reaching a fever pitch that drew the attention of the other Z fighters. Tien exchanged a glance with Krillin, both uncertain of whether they should intervene or let the two hash out their differences. Spoken like a person who doesn't know how to. Piccolo shouted back in response. You listen here, you oversized brute. Gohan is young and is in the process of developing his unique fighting style. Combat is not solely about raw power. Maybe if you understood something beyond pounding your opponents into the ground, you'd get it. That's because you're not using enough brute force. And you think you can talk down to me, Namekian? I've crushed stronger opponents than you in my sleep, you'd *CK-less photosynthetic slug. Piccolo reared back, another nerve touched. This freaking scion is managing to push all of his buttons at the same time today. I don't want to hear that coming from you, you compensating, room IQ ape. While Nappa and Piccolo were engaged in their heated exchange, Alpha grew tired of the melee exchange and decided to change tactics. With a sudden burst of speed, it created some distance between itself and Gohan and unleashed a key attack. Caught off guard by the abrupt change in strategy, Gohan momentarily froze, revealing his inexperience. The key blast barreled into Gohan and the resulting explosion resonated through the air. Gohan, taking the blast head-on, was sent tumbling backward from the force of the explosion. Piccolo, alerted by the sound of the explosion, whipped his head towards the ongoing battle.
God damn it, Gohan. Dodge.
And now he's not dodging when he is supposed to. Nappa angrily pointed at the result, shaking in rage. Oh, so now dodging is important. Dodging is important, but you're teaching him to dodge at all the wrong moments. If he was fighting like a scion, this wouldn't have happened. When he started, he wouldn't dodge at all. That's because you're just a SHIT teacher. Nappa bellowed, his entire frame trembling as he shook his fist, unaware that he had just pressed the Piccolo button a second time. Piccolo ground his teeth, a surge of sheer fury coursing through him. I'm a shit teacher. Considering I had to start from scratch, and a year later, he's surpassed Raditz, I'd say I did a pretty decent job. The credit goes to the kid's potential, not you. It's a miracle he got as strong as he did in spite of you rather than because of you. And let's not even talk about Raditz because as far as talent goes, his was shit. Like you can do any better. Nappa could viscerally feel his blood pressure rapidly rising, and due to his lack of hair, the pulsing veins that had spread from his forehead to his entire head were prominently displayed. He growled, taking a menacing step forward, his massive frame casting a large shadow that reached Piccolo's foot. You know what? Screw you. The hell I can't. Cupping his hands around his mouth, Nappa bellowed across the battleground, cutting through the chaos of the fight above. Hey, Alpha.
Gohan.
Stop your playground squabble and get over here. Due to Nappa and Piccolo's argument, no one noticed Alpha and Gohan's fight had devolved precisely into what could only be described as a playground squabble. Up in the air, Alpha could be seen pulling on Gohan's hair, while a somewhat singed Gohan had Alpha locked in a debatably effective chokehold as he continuously slapped the Cyberman's face. At the moment of Nappa's authoritative holler, both abruptly stopped, their attention drawn downward with mirroring expressions of bewilderment. Their gazes shifted from Nappa to each other, silently querying if the other knew what was happening. Alpha responded with a nonchalant shrug before smoothly descending to Nappa's side, while Gohan followed suit toward Piccolo's position. Nappa gestured emphatically towards Gohan, his face contorting with anger as he addressed the Z fighters collectively. You see this kid? Even with no combat experience, he's already stronger than Raditz. That's what you call potential. The Scion's voice was filled with exasperation as he shook his head in disbelief and disappointment. And look at what you chuckleheads are doing. Not letting a Scion battle? All of his instincts and edge would have dulled if you delayed any longer. You. Nappa shouted into his scouter in frustration. Hey scouter, calling a person what animal on this planet means the closest to incompetent dumbass? The small device softly mumbled its response, relaying information directly into Nappa's ears. He absorbed the input with a nod before resuming his tirade without missing a beat. You bunch of F***king donkeys. Krillin, greatly annoyed, yelled straight back at Nappa. Gohan is not a savage like you Scions. He is a Scion. It runs in his blood. Just look at his tail. Look at. However, in a sudden shift, Nappa's emotion transformed from overwhelming anger to frightening calm eerily abruptly. Where in the 7 shits is his tail? Krillin just couldn't resist. The opportunity was so great. Maybe he misplaced it somewhere like Goku did. At the exact same time as Krillin, Piccolo stated matter-of-factly, I ripped it off. A myriad of expressions flickered across Nappa's face, none of them pleasant. While it might be an exaggeration to claim that a Scion's tail is their very life, it certainly wasn't to say that it was a major source of their pride. A scion's tale is of utmost importance as it was the source of their deeply ingrained strength and pride, their greatest transformation, the Oozaru. The loss of one's tail due to combat was an acceptable outcome, as it was a sign of a warrior's mettle and a mark of a hard-won battle. However, in the annals of scion history, the deliberate removal of a tail during peacetime carried with it a great symbolic significance. To strip a scion of their tail outside the crucible of battle was, in the eyes of scion tradition, an act of unparalleled dishonor, a fate reserved for traitors, deserters, backstabbers, or kingslayers. It represented eternal exile. To witness Gohan bearing the marks of the disgrace of the greatest order from someone Nappa knew the boy regarded to be a mentor was just absolutely *king unacceptable. The storm of emotions that had roiled across Nappa's face finally froze, crystallizing itself into unrestrained anger. His once booming voice was silenced, replaced by a guttural primal scream of rage that ripped out of the Scion general's throat and resounded through the desolate wasteland and beyond.
Vriria.
As the echoes of Nappa's enraged scream slowly dissipated into silence, an unsettling calm settled upon Nappa. His visage, once twisted by fury, transformed into a mask of emotionless zen, as if the tempest within him had been utterly tamed. With measured composure, Nappa turned his gaze back to Vegeta, who had been silently observing the conversation since time unknown. Nappa is deeply familiar with Vegeta, thanks to knowing the stoic prince all the way back to a time when Vegeta had yet to be capable of formulating a single coherent thought. As far as he's concerned, he's a pretty good judge on Vegeta's emotional nuances. Without a shadow of a doubt, Nappa can confirm that Vegeta's gaze had grown colder and more glacial than any recollection in recent memory, eclipsing even what it had been during that smartass execution. They made eye contact. Vegeta gave a casual wave of his hand, a gesture of nonchalant dismissal reminiscent of swatting away an annoying fly. Fortunately, Nappa could translate Vegetamese and understood Vegeta's unspoken directive. His prince had just granted him full authority to take reign and handle the situation however he saw fit. He'd expected that because Vegeta knew exactly how personal this issue was with him. Cruel he may be, but Vegeta had always been one to allow his subordinates to do whatever was necessary to restore their honor. Despite having Vegeta's permission to act as he wished, Nappa knew that Vegeta would skin him alive with a blunt fruit peeler if he killed the slug without first extracting every detail about the Dragon Balls out of him. After all, that worthless, honorless slug had a direct connection with the Dragon Balls that still eluded both him and Vegeta, and he would not be forgiven if immortality slipped through their fingers like this. It's iconic, Nappa thinks, that the person he wants to kill the most is also the sole individual he couldn't readily target. In a stern yet controlled tone, Nappa addressed Alpha, issuing a command that resonated with authority. Step aside, Alpha. Move somewhere else. I'll revert you to your seed form later. At the command, Alpha's face scrunched in disgust like someone who had unwittingly stepped into shit. After a moment of hesitation, Alpha's face morphed into a displeased grimace as he begrudgingly complied, moving to a nearby spot. Clearly, the prospect of being sidelined and returning to a dormant state did not sit well with the Cyberman. Choosing a designated location, Alpha hesitated and reluctantly kicked at the ground petulantly. Soon after, it burrowed into the earth, its form vanishing beneath the soil as if the very ground itself was swallowing it whole. The displaced dirt writhed for a brief moment after enveloping the Cyberman, and then the soil grew still. Observing Alpha's compliance, Nappa redirected his attention to Gohan with a renewed sense of purpose.
Allrecht, Gohan.
You've shown promise, being able to match Raditz, a grown-ass man, at such a young age. You definitely have potential in you. Nappa's tone softened as he addressed Gohan. I'll teach you the art of fighting. I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly how a scion would approach combat. Gohan looked extremely uncomfortable at the situation, but sensed that Nappa was treating him differently compared to the others. With the intuition only a child would have, Gohan pleaded his case. Could you not hurt anyone, Mr. Nappa? Please. You're not even aware of the atrocities they've committed against you, kid. I'm fine with it, really. Gohan reassured, offering a bright smile while attempting to downplay whatever it was Nappa found so offensive. He wasn't entirely sure what the big deal was or why Mr. Nappa seemed so angry on his behalf, but he hoped to talk Mr. Nappa out of his murderous rage. To Gohan's relief, Nappa's fury deflated. I've heard that before. Nappa's face drooped with sorrow, stirred by a distant memory. But I'm not okay with it, kid. Taking a moment to regain composure and clear his emotions, Nappa closed his eyes. He knows he cannot allow anger to cloud his judgment in battle. When he opened his eyes again, there was only calm and focus within them. A beat later, Nappa reverted to the state he was in when he first landed with Vegeta in the wasteland, whatever that had just affected him already suppressed and in the past. Now, you lot get to face the real deal. I'll enjoy taking you all apart.
Chapter 39, Nappa, the Saiyan Juggernaut.
Nappa's imposing figure concealed the tremendous power contained within him as he advanced confidently with deceptive grace. With purposeful strides, he started a series of arm rotations, loosening his shoulders in anticipation of the impending battle. A dangerous smile spread across Nappa's face, exposing a set of perfectly straight teeth. Just to let you know, my battle power stands at 5,500, so you're all too weak to take me on. Nappa declared casually. Then, with a devil-may-care attitude, he cracked his neck, the resounding pops echoing loudly in the ears of the Z-fighters. This will be no fun if I were to go all out, so I'll grant you all a handicap. I'll restrict myself to melee attacks only, no energy blasts, how's that? Despite the demeaning declaration, none of the Z-fighters voiced their objections, the recent demise of Yamcha still casting a dark shadow over them. They have dedicated an entire year to preparing for Nappa, but his power still dwarfed their own despite their tireless efforts to bridge the gap. A sense of unease, tinged with apprehension, crept through the Z-fighters. Nappa's ki surged around him ominously as he took another step forward. The very earth beneath Nappa groaned as he unleashed his power, the maelstrom of energy released creating small cracks that snaked across the ground. As tension intensified, Nappa's gaze picked out Gohan from the small crowd, addressing him. Hey kid, stay put and watch closely, alright? I'm about to demonstrate the philosophy of combat, step by step, just as I instructed Raditz. And Vegeta too, I suppose. Nappa paused, as though contemplating his next words. I'll exercise some restraint to make commentary on their mistakes, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. There'll be a practical exam after I'm done with these Chuckluff *CKs, so be ready. Unsure of the situation, Gohan's eyes sought validation from Piccolo and received a subtle nod in return. Gohan's eyes twitched. Well, that's unhelpful. He can probably interpret that nod at least 3 different ways on the top of his head given the current situation. But he's going to tentatively interpret that as Mr. Piccolo permitting him to sit this one out. And maybe, perhaps, possibly join in at an opportune moment. Gohan nodded hesitantly to Nappa's and Piccolo's instructions, due to a lack of a better response. After confirming Gohan's affirmation, Nappa made the universal bring it on gesture, mirroring the gesture Yamcha made against the Cybermen. Nappa's eyes flickered between his opponents, dissecting their stances and searching for the weak link among them. The first to move was Kairatsu, spearheading the offensive by once again taking an aerial approach. He detached from the group and ascended into the sky, a Dodone ray already in his outstretched hand. On the battlefield below, the remaining Z-fighters tensed their muscles like tightly wounded springs, before launching into battle in a synchronized assault against the stationary Nappa. The first few exchanges were absolute chaos, a flurry of movement and limbs. Punches were hurled with full force, ki blasts streaked across the battlefield like bolts of lightning, and the clash of fists vibrated through the air. However, Nappa remained unwavering. His responses were swift, almost supernatural, as he adeptly parried the barrage of attacks with minimal effort. Limbs poised for strikes were redirected, ki blasts that sought to breach his defenses dissipated futilely against him, and even the rare attacks that landed did minimal damage to the Saiyan Juggernaut. Nappa's defenses seemed impenetrable. Throughout the chaotic start, Kairatsu provided aerial support, expertly showering the battlefield with Dodone rays. Each beam navigated through the chaos with remarkable accuracy, avoiding harm to his allies while finding its mark on Nappa. At the same time, blue light surrounded Kairatsu as he utilized his telekinesis to impede Nappa's movements while attempting to twist the Saiyan general's neck. To Kairatsu's shock, Nappa was largely unfazed by his interference. Each Dodone ray, meticulously aimed and skillfully fired, merely scorched the surface of Nappa's armor and his formidable skin. The telekinetic force enveloping the Saiyan general seemed to have little effect on slowing him down, and Nappa's neck remained resolutely immovable despite Kairatsu's best attempts. That being said, Nappa's lack of visible response to the interference did not imply that he was not aware of it. In fact, he was acutely aware of the interference because the telekinesis was actually significantly hindering his movements. Without these impediments, he could effortlessly dismantle the trio confronting him, and the fact that he was being kept from doing so genuinely grated on his nerves. Good aim with those blasts, midget. I'm going to deal with you first because you're damn annoying. Nappa managed to shout through the chaos, his voice booming even as he ducked and weaved through the onslaught of 3 different attackers. Nappa frowned as an unexpected punch slammed into his face immediately after his shout. The blows didn't hurt too much, and he wasn't taking a whole lot of damage from it either. Those didn't concern him. Instead, What concerned him was the image of his perceived invincibility. He had a reputation to maintain and a kid to impress, but he wasn't going to achieve either if he was buried beneath these feeble attacks. Nappa knew he could swiftly put an end to this skirmish, crush his adversaries' advances, and effortlessly claim their lives. Easily, in fact. He has 1,000,001 different ways to do so. However, he was not here to just win. He was here to impart the wisdom of Saiyan combat to Gohan, and to accomplish that adequately, he needed to engage them one-on-one for an optimal showcase of his lessons. And for that, he needs distance. Explosive breath cannon. Piccolo roared, unleashing from his mouth a surge of energy that coalesced into a powerful beam. Nappa casually sidestepped the blast, watching the energy beam soar past him and detonate in the distance. Hey, he has one of those moves too. What do you know, in addition to being a shit teacher, the Namekian is a copycat too. Don't announce your attacks like a dumbass unless you're certain they'll connect, Namekian. You're not in the Ginyu Force, you donkey. Seizing the momentary lull from the blast, Nappa bellowed, projecting his energy outward to generate an explosive release of force. The surging energy propelled the Z fighters away from him, scattering them across the battlefield like fallen leaves in the gust of wind. For once freed of his enemies, Nappa flexed his colossal thighs, the muscles within them tensing like coiled springs. A spider web of cracks expanded outward as Nappa catapulted himself with explosive acceleration into the air directly at Kairatsu. Kairatsu panicked, his small frame becoming a blur as he frantically backpedaled desperately through the air, unleashing Dodone rays at Nappa in rapid succession. The beams of energy sliced through the atmosphere in a desperate attempt to halt the approaching juggernaut. However, to Kairatsu's dismay, Nappa did not even bother to defend himself, instead rushing straight through at a breakneck speed and ignoring every attack thrown his way. Kairatsu's eyes widened in disbelief as his attacks bounced off Nappa harmlessly as if they were mere ping-pong balls. As his Dodone rays fizzled out, their luminous trails dissipating like dying embers, so did his hope. It was too late for him to do anything else, for Nappa had already closed the distance and arrived before him. I told you I'll take you out first. Nappa swung his colossal arms forward, harnessing the entirety of his momentum, and executed a classic clothesline that slammed into Kairatsu's chest with bone-crushing force. Nappa could both hear and feel something break as the midget was sent hurtling backward, soaring through the air like a ragdoll. The ground trembled upon Kairatsu's impact in the distance, the collision creating a cloud of dust and debris that hung in the air. Nappa has a feeling that the little guy won't be rejoining the battle anytime soon. Descending with calculated precision, Nappa crashed into the ground near Gohan, his boots meeting the earth with a harsh thud. Paying little heed to the distant shouts of Kairatsu, he raised a single finger, pointing straight upwards, exactly like a patient schoolteacher teaching a lesson. The lessons might be a bit out of order, kid, given the chaotic nature of this battle and all. Nappa suddenly ducked as Krillin sailed over his head, the Earthling warrior's flying kick narrowly missing its target. Unfazed, Nappa continued without missing a beat. And don't be like that idiot. Flying kicks are almost always an invitation for your opponent to beat your ass. Nappa ignored the defiant "screw you," echoing in the distance, presumably from the same bald idiot who had just flown over his head. So, kid, lesson 1: deflect. It's about knowing when to dodge and when to block. Amidst his instructive words, Nappa found himself forced to re-engage with both Tien and Piccolo. The two warriors, grasping the chance, had dashed in to confront the Saiyan juggernaut. Unfortunately for their pride, Nappa still had the leeway to continue his lesson. This normally doesn't need to be explicitly taught, but we will this time because the Namekian screwed it up. Piccolo's scowl deepened, his features contorting with anger at the insult hurled his way. He immediately retaliated, punching Nappa in the face. It dealt no damage. Nappa gleefully punched Piccolo back. He watched with satisfaction as his punch sent the Namekian hurtling through the air. Nappa pressed on with his lesson, refusing to be interrupted. If you find yourself evenly matched with your enemy, Gohan, then mere evasion won't cut it. Do not just dodge their melee attacks. Dodging by itself allows the enemy to maintain their rhythm and seize control of the battle's pace. Instead, deflect. Deflections introduce deviations, and those deviations create opportunities. Engaging Tien, Nappa showcased his lesson, deflecting oncoming attacks with a precision that bordered on being art. When your enemy loses their rhythm, that's when you seize control. In a seamless continuation of the lesson, Nappa demonstrated the practical application of his teachings by deflecting one of Tien's strikes and simultaneously pulling Tien's arm downward in an unexpected motion, forcing the Earthling off balance. Nappa immediately shifted gears, transitioning from a defensive stance to a relentless offensive onslaught while picking up the pace of the melee significantly. Tien scrambled to block the rapid succession of blows. And when they panic or overextend, that's when you capitalize on their mistake and punish them for it. Nappa's words foreshadowed the imminent conclusion of the lesson as Tien, greatly rushed by the accelerated pace, committed a mistake. In that moment of vulnerability, Nappa seized the opportunity with ruthless efficiency, delivering a brutal knee to Tien's stomach. Tien practically folded in half from the impact, the air escaping his lungs in a gasp of pain before the strike propelled him through the air on a collision course with a distant rock pillar. Having concluded his demonstration with Tien, Nappa turned his attention toward Gohan. Suddenly, Nappa's sharpened instincts, honed by years of combat experience, screamed at him to move, and he trusted them without hesitation. A split-second decision that had him twisting in the air. A fraction of a moment later, a menacing yellow spinning disc hurtled through the space he had stood just moments before. Nappa watched as the disc continued on its trajectory, spinning into the distance and slicing a rock formation in its path cleanly in half. Oh shit. Alright kid, I almost died there, but that's lesson 3, situational awareness. Stay vigilant and be wary of sneak attacks. Krillin, more than a little annoyed, surged forward toward Nappa, fist brightly aglow with infused ki. His resolve and anger were palpable as he shouted, "Shut up. I'm not your teaching material. And this one's for Yamcha." Krillin's determination to avenge Yamcha's earlier demise materialized in a full-powered body strike, one of the most powerful physical blows he had unleashed in this battle. The air vibrated as Krillin's punch landed squarely on Nappa's chest, an explosive fusion of energy and force that converged into a single moment. Nappa didn't budge an inch. A strangled gasp clawed its way out of Krillin's throat as he witnessed the cruelty of reality. In a sudden and stark realization, Krillin became acutely aware of his proximity to an unscathed Nappa. His face paled as the implications of his actions settled in. Oh no. Krillin exhaled breathlessly. Don't charge in screaming, you imbecile. Nappa backhanded Krillin in the face with a powerful strike, the sheer force sending the martial artist forcefully into a nearby rock pillar. A bellowing roar echoed after Krillin as he soared away. And nobody can tell me to shut up except Vegeta. Nappa lowered his gaze to his blood-stained fist, staring at it, before casting a critical eye at the motionless Krillin a few rock pillars away. Oof, he might have hit the bold one a tad too hard. He is not sure if that one could muster the strength to stand up again before the battle ends. The stupid suicidal charge aside, Nappa had to acknowledge his begrudging admiration for the bald idiot's energy frisbee, and as far as Nappa was concerned, it's been a hot minute since he'd been impressed by anything. That energy sawblade has proved itself to be genuinely intimidating, and in the right hands, could be absolutely lethal. Nappa nodded to himself. He's made his decision. He's going to reverse engineer that attack and steal it. It'll be a fantastic addition to his arsenal and a spectacular finishing move. Nappa's sharp eyes swept across the battlefield, assessing the aftermath of the clashes and taking stock of the locations and conditions of his adversaries. The small midget hadn't reappeared, so his clothesline must have really broken something important. The bald one had just landed in the rock pillar and wasn't showing any signs for a round 2. Three Eyes was still digging himself from the debris, but the Namekian seemed to have recovered and was ready for seconds. Nappa had identified his next target. Lesson 2 is fight smart, not hard. Nappa's voice carried clearly to Gohan. A less forceful attack at a strategic time is more effective than a full-on assault when the enemy is on high alert. In the blink of an eye, Nappa blurred into action, his figure streaking towards Piccolo. The two warriors met in the middle of the battlefield, sending shockwaves rippling through the air as their bodies collided with raw physical power. Nappa wasted no time in unleashing a brutal combination of attacks. Each of his fists glowed with energy as his fists pounded at Piccolo, forcing the Namekian warrior into a defensive stance. Piccolo braced himself against the onslaught, teeth gritting at the strikes. However, Piccolo was no slouch either. Though he raised his arms to block the relentless attacks, wincing at each impact, his eyes remained sharp, searching for an opportunity to counterattack. In a sudden move, Nappa kicked out Piccolo's knees, causing Piccolo to stumble momentarily. Jumping on the opening, Nappa deliberately cut off his energy flow before gripping Piccolo's head in a vice-like hold, his fingers digging into his enemy's green skin. Then, recalling Gohan's tailless state, Nappa proceeded to ruthlessly smash Piccolo's head into the unforgiving ground. The impacts echoed through the battlefield, once, twice, and 3 times. Nappa concluded his combination with a final, unenhanced uppercut executed with picture-perfect form. The impact of the uppercut propelled Piccolo backward in a textbook parabolic arc, with Piccolo landing with a loud thud. Nappa's attention shifted to Gohan once again, who was rather distant. Nappa projected his voice, shouting across the battlefield. "See that? Fight smart, not hard." Those last 4 unenhanced strikes packed more punch than the entirety of my energy-enhanced combination combined. Chapter 40 Piccolo's Perfect Plan. A short distance away, Piccolo gradually recovered, shaking his head to dispel the disorientation lingering from Nappa's powerful uppercut. Internally, Piccolo couldn't help but scoff. That scion must be dreaming if he believes that something so simple could keep him down. However, despite his bravado, Piccolo couldn't deny how grim the situation was. None of their physical attacks had made even the slightest dent in the Scion Juggernaut's defenses. Not even Raditz had showcased such resilience. This was just absurd. Never before has Piccolo understood the term Juggernaut as deeply as he had at this moment, because Nappa's ability to absorb attacks like an insurmountable, impervious wall was beyond anything Piccolo had seen or thought possible. Piccolo had witnessed Nappa effortlessly forcing his way through Kairotsu's telekinetic hold. He had felt the impact of his direct punch dissipate into nothingness on Nappa's face. He had watched even Krillin's full power strike fail to make Nappa budge an inch. Piccolo doesn't need any more evidence. He's been made well aware that physical attacks are futile against an opponent like this. It makes sense, even. After all, why should they try to overpower a juggernaut like Nappa in his own area of expertise? That being said, Nappa was far from invincible. After all, even the mightiest of juggernauts had their weaknesses. Piccolo's mind raced, searching for potential strategies that could breach Nappa's defenses. If he remembered correctly, Nappa had opted to evade Krillin's sawblade attack during the previous exchange. Considering that Nappa had flaunted his ability to withstand their attacks without a hint of hesitation throughout the entire battle, this deviation hinted at a vulnerability. Nappa just might be susceptible to cutting attacks. Piccolo narrowed his eyes in thought. Cutting or piercing attacks. Piccolo was confident that his special beam cannon could incapacitate Nappa, just like it did with Raditz. However, unlike the battle with Raditz, Goku wasn't here to effectively stall the enemy and buy the necessary time for him to charge his signature move. Surveying the battlefield, Piccolo's gaze eventually settled on Tien Shinhan. Though the three-eyed warrior appeared to be in fighting condition, having emerged from the pile of debris, Piccolo highly doubted Tien had the ability to stall Nappa for more than the barest of moments. Piccolo swiftly shot a telepathic message to Tien, initiating a rapid-paced conversation.
Hey, Tien Shinhan.
Do you have any piercing moves? Tien, in response, quickly reviewed his arsenal of techniques. I have the Dodone Ray. How's the charge time?
Fast.
Excellent. I'll immobilize him by grabbing his tail. While I do that, charge your Dodone Ray to its maximum potential and aim for somewhere lethal, got it?
Christe.
God, Piccolo loved working with competent people. Opting to bide his time, Piccolo crouched low, observing Nappa as the scion was preoccupied with instructing Gohan. While Piccolo wanted nothing more than to rip Nappa to pieces for attempting to steal his Gohan, he recognized that Nappa's distraction allowed him to make his move discreetly. In combat, timing was everything. And Piccolo of all people understood exactly how important seizing the right moment was. Sensing that the spotlight was elsewhere, Piccolo vanished from his position in a burst of movement, his green figure seamlessly blending with the surrounding environment like a shadow slipping through the cracks. Moments before Piccolo made his move, Nappa, standing in front of Gohan, continued his lecture rather professionally, his arms casually folded behind his back as though he was an experienced university lecturer. This lesson is out of order, but lesson 5 is press your advantage. When attacking, you must be decisive and brutal. Don't give your enemies the chance to recover, take them down immediately. If your enemies make a mistake or present an opening, seize the opportunity and punish them for it. Nappa paused, allowing his point to sink in before resuming teaching Gohan, his tone measured and instructive. An extension of this principle is when you are confronted by multiple enemies. Concentrate your efforts on just one and remove them from the fight. Notice how the white midget and the bald idiot haven't returned? The fewer opponents you have to deal with, the better. Despite being engrossed in teaching, Nappa remained vigilant enough to catch Gohan's eyes darted behind him for a fleeting moment, an indication that something had caught Gohan's attention. He had survived enough battles to know to not question such cues and just heed them. On the battlefield, a moment of hesitation could result in death, and in his opinion, he highly prefers to look dumb than dead. Without hesitation, Nappa pivoted on his heels in a full 180-degree turn, his eyes narrowing as he crossed his arms defensively before him. His battle-honed reflexes kicked in, preparing him for a potential threat. To Nappa's surprise, however, no one was behind him, and no attack materialized. His defenses, poised and ready, had successfully protected him against a threat that did not exist. In reality, Piccolo had skillfully dived below the Scion's field of view, leveraging Nappa's massive frame to his advantage. With a seamless twist of his body, Piccolo maneuvered behind Nappa and yanked the Scion General's tail from its place on the Scion's waist with an iron grip. Here's a lesson of my own, Gohan. Identify a weakness, and exploit it. However, the outcome that Piccolo envisioned did not arrive. Instead of incapacitation like Raditz, Nappa merely looked down at Piccolo with a cocked eyebrow, unimpressed by the attempt. If you want to go to third base with me, Namekian, you need to at least buy me dinner first. Nappa's attempt at humor did not deter him from instantly reverting to battle mode. With blinding speed, Nappa extended his hands, intending to grapple Piccolo, who was behind him. Piccolo had no idea what a third base was, but true to his experience, Piccolo swiftly overcame the surprise hiccup in his plan. Twisting himself sharply, he narrowly evaded Nappa's attempt to grab him, leaving Nappa's arms grasping air just inches above his head. Piccolo gripped Nappa's tail tighter. If this approach doesn't affect Nappa, then it's time for Plan B. Piccolo, deploying his telekinetic ability, established a forceful connection with Nappa and hoisted the Scion upward. At the involuntary suspension, Nappa's body lurched, his arms instinctively reaching out for stability, a reflex that had him grasping at the air. Piccolo took to the skies rapidly, dragging the floating Nappa behind him as he rose. Then, while ascending, Piccolo started to spin Nappa mid-air by the tail, not unlike a hammer throw at the Olympics. With a sudden and decisive motion, Piccolo released Nappa, hurling him downward toward the awaiting ground like a falling star. Seizing Nappa's moment of vulnerability, Piccolo descended rapidly, fist outwards in a classic flying punch, aimed directly downward at Nappa. At the same time, Piccolo telekinetically shoved Gohan to a safer distance, shielding him from the imminent blast radius. Piccolo landed with a resounding impact, colliding with Nappa's awaiting arms, creating a small crater around them. The sheer force of Piccolo's attack drove Nappa a few inches into the unforgiving terrain below. Having established a momentary advantage, Piccolo prepared to unleash a move he hadn't employed in quite some time. The battlefield appeared to be frozen in time, suspended in a moment of anticipation, as Piccolo, drawing upon the depths of his energy reservoir, roared with authoritative power. Hyper-explosive demon wave. A tidal wave of energy erupted from Piccolo, radiating outward like a supernova, enveloping both fighters in a torrent of destructive power. The ensuing explosion consumed the battlefield, turning it into a spectacle of blinding light visible from miles away. Gohan, propelled to a safer distance by Piccolo's telekinetic shove, found himself seated on the ground, his gaze fixated on the explosion's epicenter. Not far off, Tien stood, Dodone ray crackling at his fingertips, his eyes wide in stunned disbelief as his gaze locked onto the immense cloud of debris. Shock and awe were painted across both Gohan and Tien's faces. With bated breaths, they awaited the reveal of the aftermath. After the explosion had run its course, a haunting stillness settled over the battlefield, interrupted only by the pitter-patter of small rocks falling to the ground. Amidst the smoke, a lone figure gradually became discernible. Tien and Gohan swallowed nervously. To Tien and Gohan's great relief, the blurry silhouette revealed itself to be Piccolo, his green skin covered with dust but still bright and unmistakable. He floated slightly above the ground, not unlike how a superhero might hover triumphantly over his fallen foes. Both Gohan and Tien relaxed as they absorbed the scene, a surge of hope kindling within them as the outcome of the battle became clearer. They've won. As the dissipating smoke continued to unveil the aftermath, Tien and Gohan's burgeoning hope plummeted to the depths of their hearts. Nappa too had emerged relatively unscathed, one hand nonchalantly brushing away a mixture of dust and blood from his face. Simultaneously, his other arm was clamped around Piccolo's neck from behind with a vice-like chokehold, hoisting the Namekian off his feet. Tien and Gohan's hope withered and died as they realized the solitary figure they had initially seen was nothing more than Piccolo being held out by his neck in front of Nappa. "Goddamn. You got me good," Nappa gruffly admitted, a begrudging hint of approval in his voice. "Hey Namekian, that was a clever strategy and a good lesson for the kid. Good on you." All things considered, that had been a damn excellent technique. It wasn't enough to kill him, but it sure as hell did hurt. Nappa was man enough to admit that much. Though Nappa had acknowledged Piccolo in a surprising display of sportsmanship, the compliment barely registered in Piccolo's mind, as his attention was consumed by the urgent need for breath. Nappa's iron chokehold had effectively severed all air and blood circulation, and he could feel the encroaching darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. Hearing no response from Piccolo, Nappa took a moment to attend to his body. With a practiced motion, the Scion general cracked his neck joints and shook off the shattered pieces of his battle-worn armor. The broken pieces cascaded off him, falling like discarded fragments of an old exoskeleton. Nappa cast an eye over his armor. The shoulder pads were obliterated, as it was designed to be, but the rest of his armor remained serviceable. As for himself, Nappa was only a bit rattled from the explosion. His ears were ringing and his body felt somewhat numb, but aside from that and some light burns, he was in perfectly fine condition. Then, the compliment he unintentionally gave to the Namekian registered in his brain, and he quickly corrected himself. "You're still a shit teacher though." Despite the debilitating chokehold, Piccolo managed to summon the last vestiges of his strength to spit out his response. F***CKU. Then he blacked out Chapter 41, Rage, Son Gohan Rage. Nappa savored the feeling of the Namekian slumping in his arms with a sense of great satisfaction. To be perfectly honest, he had been pretty lenient on the Namekian as a whole, making sure the useless slug suffered no significant injuries, unlike the rest. If it had been left entirely to him, given what he did to Gohan, Piccolo might have found himself missing a few limbs. And possibly a face too. Nappa continued his chokehold for a bit longer, ensuring that the Namekian truly was unconscious. Too many enemies had played dead before, and he was not about to let the Namekian of all people employ such tactics. His eyes flickered to the three-eyed warrior in the distance, who seemed reluctant to unleash his attack with his comrade in the way. Oh, how cute. The Triclops doesn't want to hurt his ally. Without warning, Nappa vanished, dropping the unconscious Piccolo on the ground as he catapulted himself toward Tien. Moments before Nappa blurred away, Tien found himself trapped in a dilemma. Though the exceptionally powerful Dodone ray poised on his still extended fingers should theoretically pierce straight through Nappa, it was useless if he did not have a clear shot. Ever since Piccolo's strategy had failed, both Nappa and Piccolo had been swiftly maneuvering through the air, and Tien had never been given a clear opportunity. Firing the Dodone ray at this moment, immediately after Piccolo's explosive move, would undoubtedly result in the attack missing its mark, given Nappa's focus state and the unfavorable distance. Tien knew he needed to reserve the Dodone ray as a strategic trump card and not a weapon to be squandered recklessly. However, Tien's plan crumbled upon first contact. In the blink of an eye, Nappa materialized before Tien, the massive frame of the Scion casting a dark shadow over him. Before he could react, Tien found an energy-infused punch hurtling toward him. The colossal force of Nappa's energy-infused punch collided with Tien's extended fingertips and triggered the premature detonation of the Dodone ray. So immense was the impact that Nappa's fist compressed Tien's fingers into his fist, then his fist into his wrist and finally, his wrist into his forearm. A visceral scream tore through Tien's throat as his once extended hand was mauled under the brutal might of Nappa's attack, leaving it mangled and crumpled. Perhaps driven by a surge of adrenaline or a second wind, Tien defied the excruciating agony and launched himself upward. With his remaining hand, he delivered a full-body haymaker in a desperate attempt to retaliate against his seemingly invincible foe. The forceful blow slammed into Nappa's cheek, but the Scion's head and expression remained stoically unchanged. Tien's face twisted into a grimace. He raised his uninjured hand. Kiko. Nappa did not give Tien the chance to complete his attack. With an unbothered expression, Nappa delivered a liver punch before seamlessly transitioning into a powerful roundhouse kick that struck Tien square in the chest, dispersing any ki Tien managed to gather and also sending him violently into the distance. Nappa observed Tien's figure landing in the distance with an arched eyebrow. Upon landing, the Triclops immediately writhed in pain and cradled his chest, suggesting that his kick had likely broken a rib. Or 5. Nappa doesn't really care how many. Given the likely chest injury and the wasted hand, Nappa can pretty confidently wager that Three Eyes wouldn't be rejoining the battle. Nappa placed his hands on his waist as he scanned the battlefield, nodding in approval of his own performance. Good. All the Chuckluff *CKs are down for the count. Having completed his task, Nappa turned on his heel and casually strolled back towards Gohan. It's time to wrap up his lessons. Lesson 3 again, situational awareness. Three Eyes had been cooking up something back there ever since I engaged the Namekian, Nappa bellowed, projecting his voice across the battlefield to reach Gohan. With a casual gesture, he pointed his thumb backward, indicating Tien. And that segues into lesson number 4. Strike when the enemy is charging. They're most vulnerable when they're busy charging up a move. But Gohan scarcely registered the words. His gaze had fallen upon the figure of Piccolo, sprawled on the ground by Nappa's relentless chokehold. A painful lump formed in Gohan's throat as his eyes remained fixed on Piccolo's motionless body. Although Mr. Piccolo had never said it, and Gohan doubted he ever would, He knew that Mr. Piccolo cared about him. Gohan drew a shuddering breath, and gradually, the fear enveloping him began to dissipate. What had he even been so afraid of in the first place? Pain? He had endured plenty during his training with Mr. Piccolo. Death? Wasn't that just an inevitability for everyone? Disappointing the people he knew? Well, they were all dying before his eyes, and he hadn't lifted a single damn finger to help them. A flicker of rage ignited in Gohan, and a searing heat started to burn within him, a fury he had almost forgotten he had. Why was it always him? His father sacrificed himself a year ago to protect him from Raditz, and Gohan was too weak to make a difference. Now, history was repeating itself, with Mr. Piccolo stepping in to save him from Mr. Nappa, and he was still too weak to make a difference. Why? Why was he so utterly useless? Why did the people he cared about always end up getting hurt? The thought gave way to an intense surge of anger that blazed like an inferno deep within him. He was furious, not just at the world for thrusting him into this ordeal, not just at Mr. Nappa for harming everyone he cared about, but also at himself. Gohan's teeth clenched as his self-hatred fueled his anger, transforming his once trembling voice into a resolute growl. Mr. Piccolo had been right. It was time to grow the hell up. There won't always be a savior coming, and he couldn't afford to be a child any longer. If he wanted things to change, he had to do it himself. No more tears, no more relying on others to fight his battles. He has to do it on his own. Gohan felt a surge of energy course through his veins. The young scion was no stranger to the power lying dormant within him, a power that was currently straining against him like a beast yearning to be unleashed. His gaze hardened, and a newfound determination gleamed in his eyes not present before. "Hey kid, are you even listening to me?" Nappa's voice cut through the air from a few paces away. Oblivious to Gohan's inner turmoil, Nappa continued, "As I was saying, power level is king. If your enemy has a power level higher than yours, victory is essentially impossible, so you need to make your escape." Gohan's gaze locked onto Nappa, causing the Scion General to halt in his tracks. Nappa blinked at the intensity in Gohan's eyes. The kid was distinctly different now, nothing physical of course, but an accumulation of subtle changes in demeanor. There was a newfound determination in his eyes, a straighter posture, a more aggressive body language, and considerably more volatility in his energy. Nappa could state with certainty that the Gohan before him now was not the child he had been mere minutes ago. Though Nappa did not know Gohan personally, he had witnessed the growth of countless Scion younglings in the past, and the sight of Gohan's fiery determination was a familiar one. Once upon a time, a young Vegeta had been the same, clenching his fists and screaming into the sky, vowing to surpass every Scion in existence. A grin spread over Nappa's face. He liked the heat in Gohan's eyes. Yes, this is much more like it. This is what a Scion should be. Seeing Gohan's growth had ignited something within Nappa as well. Oh, how he missed this feeling. He had forgotten how it felt. It had been so long since he could finally cast off the identities of Nappa, the Commander General, and Nappa, the warrior, and embrace the old dusty mantle of Nappa, the head Royal Academy trainer. A surge of joy swept over Nappa, and a broad smile adorned his face. After decades, he was finally in his element. And he knew exactly how to draw out Gohan's potential. With an air of arrogance, Nappa stared down at Gohan, his words oozing with disdain. "Does it make you angry? The fact that I'm beating the bloody piss out of everyone you know?" Gohan, feeling a torrent of rage welling up within him, clenched his fists in defiance. "Your ragtag group of friends were weak. They were pathetic and they were nothing before me." Gohan, grinding his teeth, started to tremble. "Are you a coward, Gohan?" Nappa sneered. Gohan, steadfastly averting his gaze, shook his head in silent refusal. Unfazed by the lack of a verbal response, Nappa continued, manipulating Gohan's emotions with calculated precision. "I think you are, Gohan. You faltered when fighting Alpha. You were too afraid to engage me and stood idly by as I nearly killed everyone you knew. What do you call such behavior, if not cowardice?" Nappa could keenly sense Vegeta's disapproving gaze boring into his back. Vegeta had consistently voiced his disapproval of Nappa's fraternization with the enemy in the past, admonishing him whenever the opportunity arose. He knew their routine by heart. He'd get a reprimand, he'd apologize, Vegeta would scoff, and then they'd do the same song and dance all over again the next time. For Vegeta, this time is no different, but for Nappa, this time is different. Very different. Nappa could sense the boiling anger coursing through the trembling Gohan, reaching a higher peak with each passing second. The young scion was on the verge of breaking into something greater, teetering precariously between mediocrity and potential. Beautiful. He needs just a little more. As for stopping fraternizing, now? Screw off. Vegeta can go suck a Super Saiyan's dick for all he cares. I'll ask you again. Are you a coward, Gohan?
No.
Look at me in the eye when you talk, you weak, cowardly brat. You are the problem. You're the reason why everyone around you is dying. Your daddy died because of you. Now, that Piccolo will also die because of a rug. Before Nappa could complete his sentence, an anguished scream tore through the air. Gohan's pent-up frustration and seething rage erupted in a primal guttural cry that echoed across the battlefield. Gohan's already tenuous control over his wrath crumbled as the emotional tempest raging within him finally shattered the barriers that constrained his latent power. The young Scion's aura ignited in a radiant display of silver energy, with small sparks of lightning dancing around it. At this moment, Gohan achieved a level of power that surpassed any he had attained previously. With an astonishing burst of speed, Gohan shot forward, closing the distance between him and Nappa in the blink of an eye. His fist, augmented by his unleashed fury and strength, collided with Nappa's face with resounding impact. The force of the blow sent small shockwaves rippling through the air and, for the first time in this battle, visibly forced Nappa to stagger backward. With a mighty roar, Gohan tapped into his power and rained forth a torrent of unbridled physical attacks directed at Nappa's face. Gohan's fists blurred, they flew faster and faster, each punch landing with precision on Nappa. Each blow carried the weight of Gohan's anguish and rage, a desperate attempt to avenge the suffering inflicted by Nappa. Caught off guard by Gohan's raw power, Nappa found himself forced onto the defensive. He looked straight down as he lowered his head, hastily raising both forearms to shield himself from the relentless onslaught. Midway through his furious attack, Gohan quickly realized the futility of launching straightforward attacks against Mr. Nappa's defenses. He's not getting through at all. Gohan narrowed his eyes. Lesson 2: Fight smart, not hard, is it? Fine, he could be strategic. Halting his assault, Gohan skillfully flew beneath Nappa's outstretched hand. As he floated downward, the young Scion lifted his gaze and found himself locking eyes with Nappa, a defiant stare meeting a surprised one in the Scion General's eyes. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Gohan's hand shot out, seizing the left half of Nappa's mustache. With a swift, resolute motion, he ripped it clean off. Nappa howled in pain as his facial hair, his pride and joy, was mercilessly removed by Gohan. He gingerly held a hand to the now bare portion where half of his mustache used to be, yelling in agony as all thoughts of battle fled his mind. Gohan was far from finished with Nappa. Lifting both hands to his forehead, Gohan channeled his energy, creating a colossal ball of ki that crackled with an intensity and speed surpassing any previous attempts. With an enraged roar, Gohan unleashed the most powerful blast he had released in his entire life straight into Nappa's face at point-blank range.
Masenko.
Gohan maintained the pulsating surge of energy with an intensity and duration that surpassed his usual limits. The formidable beam, not unlike a scaled-down version of Godzilla's iconic atomic breath, engulfed the towering Scion General as it continuously descended upon him. In due course, the energy reached a critical point, and a thunderous explosion resonated through the air. Gohan stopped, breathing heavily as the acrid scent of burnt ozone permeated his surroundings. He watched as the smoke gradually began to clear, revealing the aftermath of his fury. The dissipating smoke unveiled a sight that sent a shiver down Gohan's spine. The effects of Gohan's point-blank attack were evident, as scorch marks and singed armor adorned Nappa's battle-worn form. Despite the visible damage, however, Nappa stood defiantly amidst the aftermath of the colossal blast. Gohan's wide eyes mirrored a mix of disbelief and horror as he slowly began to back away from the seemingly invincible Nappa. Despite the searing pain, Nappa's laughter resonated triumphantly, laced with both approval and acknowledgement. A begrudging admiration gleamed in Nappa's gaze as his wild eyes bore into Gohan. Thanks to the fiery spirit within Gohan, the young Scion's power had risen to unprecedented levels among the inhabitants of this planet, and Nappa couldn't help but feel pleased as Gohan unleashed his potential. Take that, Namekian. Who's the superior teacher now? Ha ha ha.
Zuba Ashi.
A spectacular application of lessons 2 and 5. Nappa's voice boomed, tinged with unbridled battlelust. Remember that rage, Gohan. Never falter. Never surrender. Victory or death. That's how a Scion warrior should be. Having spoken his piece, Nappa blitzed through the scant distance between himself and Gohan, burying a devastating punch into Gohan's gut. Spit and blood erupted from Gohan's mouth, a consequence of the impact that forcibly expelled every ounce of air from his lungs. Gohan collapsed to the ground, breathless and reeling from the sheer force of Nappa's punch. Nappa, his half-mustache twitching, advanced, poised to deliver the next blow. Unexpectedly, to his surprise, Gohan raised a shaky hand in the universal signal for a pause. Intrigued by this interruption, Nappa actually did halt mid-motion, lifting an eyebrow as his confusion momentarily disrupted his battle-induced fervor. "What's this, kid? You asking for a timeout in the middle of a fight?" Gohan, still catching his breath, nodded. Nappa apparently found the request incredibly amusing because he burst into laughter. In a rather uncharacteristic fashion, he decided to indulge the request, allowing Gohan a brief respite. "Allrecht, Kid. You're hella lucky it's me you're up against. Most wouldn't entertain something as childish as this," Nappa chuckled. As he expected, it looks like the kid still has a lot to learn. On the ground, Gohan couldn't hold it in any longer and puked. Even as he did so, Gohan could not believe that actually worked. "Ha! Shows you, Mr. Piccolo." Then, Nappa's eyes sharpened as he crossed his arms, transitioning to a more serious tone. "Listen up, Gohan. If there's one thing you take away from all I taught you, it's that a Saiyan should never let someone else walk all over them. You have to stand up for yourself in this universe because you can't rely on anyone else. I don't care if you're a peacemaker, a warmonger, or a genocidal maniac, reality is equally cruel to everyone." After his brief words of wisdom, Nappa touched the beardless half of his face with a wince. He'd need to hit a recuperation tank relatively soon if he wanted to avoid regrowing his facial hair from scratch. After a momentary pause, Nappa scanned Gohan with his scouter once more. "Not too shabby, kid. You peaked at 2,800 during that blast, and now you're resting at a little over 1,800, compared to your initial 1160 when this battle started," Nappa remarked. A rare flash of admiration crossed Nappa's face as he mused. "Not at Vegeta's level when he was your age, but you would have knocked Raditz face in with that kind of power. Quite the improvement, Gohan. You wanna come with us?" "No." Gohan gasped. Nappa chuckled at the swift refusal. "Well, you've got until we finish making our wishes on the Dragon Balls to reconsider, kid." Stretching his arms, Nappa spoke his thoughts out loud. "Alright, let's take care of the others. I'd rather not go through the hassle of knocking them down all over again." Chapter 42, Hope Has Descended. Moments after the fight with Cybermen started, a small distance from the battlefield. Unbeknownst to all, from a concealed vantage point shielded by rocks, a camera crew worked frantically to adjust their lenses, attempting to zoom in on the chaotic scene unfolding in the distance. Their camera lenses strained to capture every detail without risking proximity to the intense battle. The crew members, their faces masked with a blend of awe and trepidation, exchanged hushed whispers as they observed the Z-fighters confronting the formidable aliens. The camera panned to capture the ongoing skirmish, green monsters erupting from the earth, and the mysterious warriors engaging in combat against them. The air was frequently thick with smoke and dust, remnants of the explosive clashes that regularly obscured the view. Erison's jaw clenched as he received another urgent message from his station through his earpiece, telling him to withdraw. These messages had become a frequent occurrence since he had set up here with his crew, and they grated on his already very limited patience. However, despite the persistent pleas to retreat, he remained steadfast. He had no intention of interrupting the live broadcast for even a moment. He had unfinished business to settle with these son-of-a-bitch aliens. Back when the aliens had landed, he counted his lucky stars for being literally around the corner from a hospital, and Erison's celebrity status had helped ensure his daughter got treatment immediately. Erison's heart sank as he replayed his harrowing memories. His daughter's survival had brought him an equal mix of relief and despair because while she was alive, she had suffered serious head injuries that resulted in her falling into a coma. Ironically, his daughter's injury had occurred during the initial fall when he had intended to protect her, not from the large debris that fell around them. Any of that debris could have easily crushed them, but no. At the hospital, the doctors had painted a grim picture that left little room for optimism. In fact, the medical professionals were nearly certain that she would not regain consciousness because there was an almost negligible chance that a child her age would awaken from a coma induced by such severe brain injuries. Erison wanted to laugh. The irony of it all felt like fate had thrust a knife into him and cruelly twisted it. Erison knows he can't physically hurt the alien. He knows that now. Nothing he attempts will leave even a scratch on those aliens who can effortlessly walk through explosions unscathed. So, he'll leverage what he does best, and weaponize the only thing he can do. He'll document it. He'll narrate it. He'll memorialize it. He'll hope that the Earth's forces, whoever they may be, can kill these bastards because he will be here to broadcast the moment of their deaths to the entire world, and he'll make it his life's work to ensure that no one ever forgets it. And if the forces of Earth fall, then none of it mattered anyway. Erison, withdraw already. This coverage is not worth your life. Think about your career, your future. The voice in Erison's earpiece and the background shouts from his colleagues in the studio that urged him to evacuate fell on deaf ears. A bitter smile played upon his lips as he pondered on the notion of the future, a concept that had lost its luster. What future does he have without his daughter in it? What use is his career to him if he couldn't use it to make his daughter smile? Erison's hands tightened around the controls, his gaze unwavering from the live broadcast feeds showcasing the intense battle between the mysterious warriors and the alien invaders. No. He couldn't afford to turn away now. The scars of the past had etched a mark too profound for him to ignore, and he was determined to see this through, consequences be damned. He would stay here and report even if it meant facing his death, his final act of vengeance if need be. Erison, I order you to return. Erison activated the communication channel on his earpiece. Then, on live television, in front of the entire East City and any other viewers he spoke. Director, with all due respect. Go F***ck yourself.
What? Erison?
Closing the communication channel, Erison seamlessly transitioned into his role as a reporter and started to narrate with the finesse of a top-notch journalist. Here we bear witness to the relentless assault on our city and our world. As the invaders wreak havoc on everything we hold dear, let this be a testament to the strength of the human spirit. At the same time, came House. Bulma, stunned by the battle, slumped into the couch with an overwhelming wave of helplessness. Her eyes were glued on the television screen, witnessing her friends and Earth's final line of defense being crushed by the immense force of the Scion's overwhelming attack. As the images of Yamcha's demise and the Z-Fighters' valiant struggle played out frame by frame on the TV, the room seemed to contract, enveloped in a heavy silence and saturated with the heavy sense of impending doom. In her arms, Bulma tightly embraced Pua, who wept inconsolably at Yamcha's demise, echoing the anguish that gripped her own heart. A tear slid down her cheek as the television broadcasted the tragic events. Even Master Roshi, usually the epitome of calm and wisdom, found himself unusually speechless, his cane creaking under the pressure of his tight grip. The gravity of the situation had etched lines of concern into his face. Beside him, Turtle covered his eyes with his flippers, unable to endure the ongoing devastation displayed on the screen. Bulma's eyes dropped from the TV screen, tracing the worn pattern of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. Like Turtle, she could no longer bear to watch the painful spectacle developing on television. Belatedly, Bulma felt the dampness of Puar's tears seeping through her sleeves as she cradled him. She only vaguely registered some hotshot reporter, Erison, or whatever his name is, providing commentary on how the mysterious fighters, her friends, were being overwhelmed. Given the circumstances, Bulma found it challenging to focus on anything at the moment. Bulma, grappling with the shock, distinctly sensed herself dissociating as her brain struggled to cope and reconcile with the current situation. In this state, she suddenly became hyper-aware of the insignificant minutiae around her. Though she could barely pick up the reporter's words, the blend of agony and anger in each inflection in his tone suddenly seemed extraordinarily clear. Everyone must be hurting right now, Bulma thought to herself. The reporter continued to report on the military's response, highlighting the army's mobilization and the Air Force being prepared for engagement. The fact that the authorities were taking action might have offered a faint glimmer of hope to everyone else, but it provided nothing to the people in this room. Direct hit, blared the TV. What? It had no effect. The TV faithfully continued the broadcast. Bulma's gaze remained fixed on a spot beyond the floor. The news of the military's ineffectiveness did not surprise her one bit. After all, the people capable of making a difference had already been defeated. Moments later, she heard the reporter narrate that all aerial forces had been decimated and the army had received the disheartening order to retreat. With that statement, the world had learned what she had known all along. The weight of despair bore down on her chest, prompting a subdued sob to escape her lips. Master Roshi, leaning heavily on his cane, glanced at Bulma with a mix of concern and sorrow. Is this the end? Are we all going to die? Bulma sobbed quietly. Not yet. Goku hasn't arrived. Master Roshi erupted passionately next to her, infusing hope into his words. Bulma shrunk in on herself. Are we even going to survive until he does? Despite Master Roshi's fervent attempts to kindle hope, he genuinely could not say with certainty that they would and was unable to provide reassurance. So, in response, there was only silence. At the same time, battlefield. Nappa reveled in destroying those airborne toys, his broad grin widening as he surveyed the wreckages below. This planet's military's attempt to engage him had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction and took no more effort than swatting away pesky insects. Instead of instilling fear in him, the military's futile attempt had only fueled his amusement. It was like a game, facing off against opponents armed with toys that posed no real threat. He felt like the big bad predator, smashing apart a house of straws to reveal the terrified prey within. Nevertheless, a faint trace of guilt crept into him. Nearly every planet he and Vegeta visited had some level of interaction with the broader universe and wielded far more formidable weaponry. These did nothing. To him, this was, in essence, the same as bullying a pitifully weak child, a behavior not exactly honorable or praised as virtuous in Saiyan culture. Hey, Gohan. Now that there are no more interruptions, let's get back to the practical demonstration of Lesson 5, shall we? Nappa gave Gohan a wink. Wide-eyed, Gohan struggled to stand but could only watch in horror as Nappa shifted his attention to Tien. As Nappa slowly made his way to Tien a short distance away, the ground began beneath him to tremble as silver energy enveloped his clenched fist, the manifestation of a devastating attack. He intended to make it quick for Three Eyes. That would be the last mercy he would grant. Tien gritted his teeth in desperation as he defiantly faced Nappa. Despite the odds stacked against him, he refused to cower. He was not going to die pathetically. Even if he were to die, he would go down fighting. Gathering the dwindling vestiges of his strength, Tien unsteadily raised his remaining hand, forming the familiar signs for the kikaho. His muscles strained, and droplets of sweat appeared on his forehead as he readied himself to unleash his final desperate attack. Nappa casually slapped Tien's hands aside. Tien's expression turned ugly as his final gambit was thwarted, leaving him defenseless against Nappa's imminent strike. The Scion's fist, surrounded by dense energy, was reflected in Tien's eyes as Nappa raised his hand, the air crackling with intensity. At that moment, a flicker of fear flashed through Tien as he looked straight at his impending death. Any last words, Three Eyes? Tien summoned just enough hope to give a tired, bloody smirk. Consequences. You're going to get it now, you arrogant asshole. Moments before, a small distance from the battlefield, Erison's gaze remained locked onto the evolving battle as he continued to report, capturing the attention of viewers worldwide. Not too long ago, he had confirmed the presence of the feared Demon King on the battlefield. And wasn't that a surprise? The terror that had gripped the entire world was now aligning himself with Earth's defenders against a mutual foe. How ironic that despite the unexpected alliance, the Demon King appeared inconsequential in the face of the overpowering might of the alien force. Erison's vigilant eyes immediately tracked a new movement on the battlefield, and urgency seeped into his voice as he narrated a significant development. Oh, the alien is making a move. He's approaching a downed fighter. Looks like he's going to deliver the finishing blow. Erison had to swallow down his apprehension as he continued his commentary. Though he maintained his composure on camera, the growing desperation in his voice betrayed him. His worst nightmare was coming to life before his eyes and that of the world. Despite Earth's best efforts, nothing they threw at the invaders made a dent. Only these mysterious fighters, among them the Demon King, exhibited any signs of success against the aliens. Unfortunately, Erison doesn't need to be a genius to know that these mysterious fighters were on the verge of defeat. Receiving a message, Erison pressed his hand to his head in a desperate gesture, straining to absorb every detail conveyed through the audio feed from the army representative. What's that about a supersonic bogey? Like Iron Man? Well, can we broadcast the details or not? He didn't give a damn whether it was Tony Stark, War Machine, or even King Thanos himself. At this point, he was at the end of his rope, so Kami, please, all he wanted was a force capable of confronting and defeating the invaders who had taken his daughter from him. If one were to inquire him about the events that transpired next, Erison could only say that, at that precise moment, the very air had exploded. The subsequent sequence of events that followed had occurred far too rapidly for Erison to comprehend or for the cameras to capture. In reality, the unfolding events went like this. As Nappa swung down to deliver the killing blow against the fallen Tien, an unseen force abruptly yanked his enemy away. This unexpected intervention left Nappa swinging his fist downward at empty air, his intended target now mysteriously tens of meters away in another direction. Immediately after the near miss, Nappa's instinct screamed, and with lightning speed, he pivoted around, arms crossed over his chest in a hasty defense. Barely a millisecond later, traversing the entire battlefield in less time than it takes to blink, Ajax crashed into Nappa's guard with a drop kick filled with thunderous momentum. The impact was titanic, carving out a crater into the ground around them. Despite his formidable strength, Nappa slid backward, etching two deep grooves in the earth. The two adversaries found themselves locked in this struggle, suspended in a moment frozen in time, as Ajax's dark eyes bore into Nappa's. Hope has descended, bitch. Nappa's eyes widened. In the next instant, the laws of physics reasserted their dominance, launching Nappa ferociously backward and transforming him into a speeding projectile that carved a deep groove into the earth beneath him. The ground quaked with the impact as he smashed through a rock pillar, then another, culminating in a bone-rattling landing into a third. Meanwhile, Erasun, safely and strategically positioned across the battleground, hadn't witnessed the incredible display of force that had flung the alien through the air. He did, however, see the aftermath. Across the expanse of the battlefield, a new figure emerged, commanding attention with an aura of confidence and authority. It was a child, or perhaps a teenager, clad in striking crimson and black pants. However, what caught Erasun's attention the most was the unmistakable symbol of God proudly emblazoned on the newcomer's back. Erasun's jaws trembled as he grappled with the enormity of what had occurred. Could it be that Kami had answered his pleas? Perhaps Kami did because Ajax had finally arrived on the battlefield. Chapter 43, Clash of Juggernauts. Nappa's muscles rippled beneath his battle-worn armor as his massive form emerged from the wreckage he had wrought. With a mighty heave, he tossed aside the pile of rocks that had buried him, the larger boulders shattering as they met the unforgiving ground. Shaking his head vigorously to dispel the lingering dust, Nappa's fierce gaze scanned the battlefield in pursuit of the mysterious newcomer. Despite the dust that surrounded him, Nappa's focus zeroed in on the unmoving figure that had dared to challenge him. The newcomer stood resolute like a sentinel, staring at him from hundreds of meters away. At this moment, Nappa's scouter, already bearing signs of wear and tear, fought to maintain its functionality. The fractured device briefly displayed a distorted number before succumbing to the damage and fading into darkness.
2700.
A feral grin lit up Nappa's face as he swiftly, almost casually, tore the broken scouter from his ear. His grin widened as the device crumpled in his formidable grip, its metal and wires giving way to his sheer strength. In a burst of explosive energy, the rocks surrounding Nappa shattered into a cloud of dust and fragments. Now freed from the debris that had briefly confined him, Nappa stalked forth with an almost predatory grace. Meanwhile, Ajax watched impassively as Nappa picked himself up and blurred through the air like a flickering apparition. Even as Nappa abruptly materialized a single foot before him, Ajax stood unyielding, undaunted by the sudden proximity of his adversary. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath as the two formidable forces locked eyes. Nappa had nothing but unbridled enthusiasm for the impending battle on his face. In contrast, Ajax met the Scion's gaze with a calm intensity, neither flinching nor betraying any hint of emotion. That was an impressive strike, Pipsqueak. I might even feel that the next day. Nappa's voice boomed, carrying just a hint of gruff approval. The Scion general appeared almost invigorated by the exchange, cracking his neck with an audible pop as his eyes gleamed with a feral intensity from the thrill of combat. But next time, don't bend your knees. You're reducing the momentum of your kick. Okay, Ajax just had to comment on that. Of course, he already knew this Nappa was different, but the disparity this time was quite substantial. What is he, a variant or something? The Nappa in Ajax's recollections had been characterized by great aggression and not so great intelligence, a brute to put it bluntly. The acknowledgement of his blow implied this Nappa was less self-centered, and the imparted wisdom on combat technique suggested a depth to his character that surpassed his one-dimensional portrayal in canon. Interesting. Ajax rapidly catalogued this new information into his mental assessment of Nappa. The shift in Nappa's strength also did not escape Ajax's notice. This iteration wielded power slightly below 5 times that of Raditz, a notable increase from just above 3 times as depicted in canon. Now, that is disturbing. However, this enhanced strength does explain the predicament of the Z fighters. As per Ajax's key sense, they were alive but incapacitated, and thus unable to actively contribute to the ongoing battle. It seemed he might have to expend more senzu than he had thought to restore them. Darn it. Also, what the hell happened to Nappa's mustache? Outwardly, even as all those thoughts flashed through his mind, Ajax simply inclined his head in acknowledgement of Nappa's advice. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind. With that momentary verbal exchange concluded, the brief interlude of camaraderie dissolved as the weight of their respective power intensified. The atmosphere between Nappa and Ajax underwent a staggering shift as cordiality was thrown out of the window. Ajax ascended into the air, levitating just enough to position himself at eye level with Nappa. Separated by a mere foot, Ajax and Nappa's eyes met in absolute silence even as the tension between them intensified. Without warning, Nappa bellowed a primal proclamation of power, and his colossal fist transformed into a lethal blur as it hurtled toward Ajax's face. The punch contained the entirety of Nappa's monstrous strength, a force derived from harnessing every sinew of his frame. It moved at a speed far beyond the limits of normal perception and was capable of overwhelming even the reflexes of the other Z fighters. It was a truly tyrannical punch that transcended any physical attack unleashed in the battle thus far. Nappa's unrestrained fist collided with Ajax's cheek in a thunderous boom. The shockwave from the impact rippled outward, triggering a violent explosion of dust that engulfed the immediate vicinity. The ground crumbled and small fissures shot through the earth for tens of feet in every direction from the blow. Nappa grinned with satisfaction as he felt his punch connecting. Game over. However, reality said otherwise. Despite the fearsome power packed into the punch, the impact barely managed to shift the position of Ajax's face by a few inches. Nappa's eyes widened in disbelief as Ajax, seemingly utterly unfazed, pushed against his hand. Slowly and deliberately, Ajax straightened his head back to its original position, Nappa's meaty fist still pressed against his cheek. Ajax's gaze, cool and unperturbed, met Nappa's widened and astonished eyes head-on. In one seamless motion, Ajax twisted his body, unleashing a full-body punch of his own that cleaved through the air like a comet. His punch struck Nappa's cheek with an equally thunderous impact, creating another violent explosion of dust while the earth beneath them cracked even further under the force of the devastating blow. Nappa's head violently jerked from the force of the punch. The Scion general stumbled and started to collapse, but almost instantly, he managed to find his balance with an awkward step. Although he swiftly regained his composure, it was evident that, for a fleeting moment, he had been overwhelmed by the attack. Slightly embarrassed and refusing to be outdone, Nappa forcefully returned his head back to its original position as well. As the dust settled, Ajax and Nappa remained entangled in a fierce standoff as their respective fists pushed against the other's face. An unspoken understanding passed between Nappa and Ajax before they slowly lowered their fists simultaneously. Nappa started to laugh as he turned his head to shout across the desolate landscape toward Vegeta. "Hey Vegeta! This one's a mutant like Rikum. He can dish out and take punishment well beyond his power level and keep going. F***ck Rikum, I've warned you to never say his name in my presence." Vegeta's scowl deepened as Nappa's words stirred unwelcome memories, and he snapped back his response with an unusually distinct irritation. "You've got a point. I'm still trying to purge the memory of those last few advances he made on us. His tastes are just too abnormal." Nappa gagged a bit. "I told you to shut up, Nappa." Orders received, Nappa refocused on Ajax, suddenly realizing he had been ignoring his opponent for the past few seconds. "Your physical prowess is absolutely phenomenal, Pipsqueak. It far surpasses what your power level would imply for it to be. I'm genuinely impressed. How do you train?" Nappa conceded his grudging admiration. The gap between Ajax's power level and the sheer physical might he exhibited in combat was astonishing, but for the life of him, Nappa couldn't figure out how this was achieved. Push-ups, sit-ups, and too much habaneros. All courtesy of a very sadistic instructor. Ajax replied blandly. Surprisingly enough, that was a completely accurate statement. Tien, with his mastery over a diverse array of abilities, had instilled in him the techniques that formed the foundation of his combat skills. Kami, his direct mentor, had single-handedly shaped Ajax's proficiency in key manipulation. But, physical prowess? Other than the helping hand Kami gave with density manipulation and his innate ability as the foundation, the credit for all that fell to Mr. Popo, that crazy son of a bitch. Nappa threw his head back, laughing deep and heartily at the evasive non-answer. "Fair enough. But did you know, Pipsqueak? You fight like a scion." Nappa declared with a crazed grin stretching across his face once more. "Thank you." Unfortunately, Ajax had no idea what that meant. After all, he had done a grand total of 2 things in this battle so far. Introductions. Nappa roared with enthusiasm. "I am Nappa, the Commander-General of the Scion Forces. Tell me your name, warrior." "It's Ajax." Ajax then tilted his head, attempting to assign an appropriate title to himself. "Student of No. Representative of Kami." "Haha. God, eh? A lofty title. Well met, Ajax." Nappa clenched his hands into fists as he assumed his combat stance, one hand at his waist and the other extended in front of him. "All right, let's do this. Make my blood sing." In the blink of an eye, Nappa's fist crashed towards Ajax with the same blistering speed as his previous strike. This time, however, Ajax was ready. His own fists slammed into Nappa's, the impact creating a small but compact blast of air that dispersed dust and debris in all directions. In the center of the collision, both combatants stood firm, unperturbed by the dust around them. Nappa, undeterred by the resistance, threw another punch. Ajax countered it with the same disciplined grace, then another, then another. Dirt erupted in chaotic bursts as the blurring fists of the two unmoving fighters collided against each other. The very earth beneath them, unable to withstand the force of their monumental strength, cracked and ruptured into a tempest of debris as if struck by an invisible force. Across the battlefield, Erasun, who had maintained an ongoing commentary throughout the broadcast, found himself speechless. His eyes were blown wide open in sheer awe as he witnessed the titanic clash before him. As they moved, both fighters had turned into an indistinct blur as they clashed at a velocity far beyond what the normal human eye, and even their cameras, can capture. Was this even a fight among mortals? It can't be. This must be a clash between gods. For Erasun, it might as well be. Through the air and across the ground, Nappa and Ajax left behind a path of chaos in their wake like the very forces of nature. Rocks shattered into fragments, craters formed with every impact, and the air pressure from their high-speed clashes can be heard throughout the battlefield. Nappa just couldn't stop his grin from expanding as Ajax's knees connected with his face, the exhilaration of genuine combat coursing through him. This was no longer a one-sided beatdown, this was an actual exchange of blows, a bona fide test of strength and skill. Nappa felt the satisfying impact of his punch, only to be greeted with another, even stronger blow in response. How long had it been since he found himself evenly matched? Too many times Nappa had either found himself outclassing his opponents or be outclassed in turn. After an extended duration of their aerial clash, it was ultimately Nappa who proved to possess superior combat skills. In a moment of strategic insight, Nappa forced Ajax to retreat several meters. Closing the distance, Nappa landed a double-handed hammer strike, a blow that sent Ajax plummeting into the wasteland below. Nappa wasted no time continuing his assault. In a seamless follow-up, he descended with both feet and crashed into the exact spot where Ajax had landed. To his surprise, Ajax was not there. Nappa lacked the time to deduce Ajax's location as moments later, Ajax delivered a swift and unexpected knee strike. The blow landed squarely on Nappa's temple, causing him to skid and tumble across the battlefield, much like the other weaklings had not long ago. Even while in involuntary flight, Nappa already knew without looking that Ajax was on the offensive, poised to rain down the next strike. He would expect nothing less. The exhilarating realization that he was truly being pushed to his limits brought a grin to Nappa's face. How fun. It's been such a long time since a native had pushed him to this extent and forced him to use this move. Time to kick it up a notch. The air surrounding Nappa shimmered with energy as he silently invoked a move reserved for only the most formidable of adversaries. Storm-forged mantle. An aura of crackling electricity instantly erupted over Nappa's imposing frame, the intensity of the lightning intensifying with each surge of energy he infused into the technique. The storm-forged mantle, while not his signature move, undeniably ranked among Nappa's most prized techniques. The shroud of energy that enveloped him elevated him to his physical peak, enhancing not only his offensive capabilities but also his defenses. The electricity wasn't merely for display either. It zapped the ever-living shit out of anyone who dared to launch an attack or mount a defense against him. Even Vegeta himself had to think twice before sparring with him when the storm-forged mantle was involved. Although, to be fair, he's uncertain whether it was genuine hesitation on his prince's part, or because Vegeta just doesn't want to deal with the post-spar static hair. Regardless of what Vegeta thought, the reality remained that no native had succeeded in inflicting substantial harm on him after he busted out the storm-forged mantle. They were either no longer capable of inflicting harm due to the immense augmentation of his defenses, or the relentless lightning from the storm-forged mantle inflicted too much damage for them to fully commit to an attack. Now that he was using this move, Nappa was confident that the battle would conclude very soon. Nappa righted himself mid-air, slowing down his velocity as he dug his feet and fingers into the ground, each limb carving a groove in the earth as he gradually came to a controlled stop. His eyes zeroed in on Ajax, rapidly approaching with impressive speed. The crimson-clad warrior showed no hesitation in the face of Nappa's electrified aura and was already extremely close. Unfortunately for him, the Nappa now was vastly different from the Nappa before. In the blink of an eye, Nappa unleashed a blistering haymaker that had killed enemies mightier than Ajax in the past. It was a strike so fast that most wouldn't even be able to register its movement. Nappa felt satisfaction as he pinpointed the exact point of impact with his now 1000 IQ mind, the side of Ajax's head. With the storm-forged mantle enhancing him, Nappa knew this full-force strike would utterly annihilate the skull in an instant. He knew that intimately. Nappa watched in anticipation, glee within him mounting, as his electrified fist closed in on Ajax's head with unstoppable speed. He watched, almost in slow motion, as his haymaker sailed towards Ajax's head, then behind it, missing its intended target. Wait, what? He missed. There was no way he could have miscalculated the trajectory of his strike. He had honed his combat instincts through countless battles, and such an error was just not possible. What happened? For a moment, it felt like the air itself had turned sticky or something. Before Nappa could deduce whether that fleeting moment was a figment of his imagination, Ajax had already breached Nappa's guard, his fist pulsating with radiant white energy, and far too close for him to evade or block. Reality snapped back into focus as Nappa caught Ajax's mouth moving, presumably for the name of this attack. Ah shit. If this attack was named, then Nappa knew it would hurt like hell. Pinpoint impact. Ajax's fist slammed dead center into Nappa's face with devastating force, releasing an explosive burst of ki upon impact that amplified the already formidable strength of the strike. Such was the blow's power that an actual dome of displaced air dispersed outward, forming a visible shockwave that propagated through nearly half the battlefield. And for the second time in this battle, Nappa was blasted backward with astonishing force, leaving behind in his wake a trail of displaced air and a streak of electrified energy. Chapter 44. Psych, you thought. Ajax took a moment to rotate his shoulders and shake out his hand. Unfortunately, an attack that powerful had its consequences, and Ajax wasn't entirely immune to the recoil. Despite having mostly adapted to his strength, Ajax could still sense the numbness spreading through his arm. Or maybe that had been from Nappa's electricity. Anyways, pinpoint impact. It's a move inspired by a particularly well-endowed character from a different franchise Ajax had known in his past life, the legendary technique of the legendary sucker. Drawing inspiration and applying similar principles from the original, he can significantly amplify the physical impact of a single strike to devastating levels. Cammy had been very impressed by the concept and had confirmed its feasibility, albeit with a few minor adjustments. After extensive experimentation with his mentor and a shit ton of key manipulation practice, he had successfully recreated the move. It was a testament to the move's formidable power that once Ajax successfully performed and tested it on Tien's multiform clone, Cammy had explicitly forbidden its use against other Z fighters. To be fair, it was a rather sensible restriction, considering how rare a resource Senzu beans were. It was also the case that none of the other Z fighters expressed any enthusiasm about being subjected to the move, especially after what they saw it did to Tien's clone. That poor clone. However, when it came to Nappa, who gives a shit? Similar to the original, the recreated version demanded massive key control, requiring near-pinpoint precision. Fortunately, the key-adapted version wasn't as difficult as the original made it out to be. What set pinpoint impact apart from its predecessor was its leniency in terms of the timing of execution. In contrast to the original move, which demanded almost instantaneous synchronization with impact, his version allowed for a slightly more forgiving window. Naturally, the amplification was directly linked to how closely the execution of the technique aligned with the moment of impact. The closer Ajax timed the key release to the actual strike, the more potent the amplification became. And though the technique could still be effective moments after the impact, the amplification would be diminished. One drawback, if it could even be considered as such, was that Ajax couldn't employ the technique instinctively in every strike yet. Its use required intense concentration and focused key control, meaning that each activation still demanded deliberate effort on his part. However, for now, this is a negligible trade-off. If a few strikes enhanced by pinpoint impact were insufficient to take his opponent down, then he had no business engaging that particular opponent in the first place. Ajax, taking a moment to assess the battlefield, squinted and extended his awareness through his key sense. It appeared that Nappa was still recovering from the devastating impact earlier. Oh well, no point in going after him now. Attacking Nappa in his current state was no different than tempting fate, as Nappa's heightened senses and battle instincts would undoubtedly alert him to any incoming threat. Ajax refrained from pressing his advantage for another reason too. In this fight, Ajax knew he could take Nappa out without too much difficulty. After all, a surprise solar flare to temporarily blind him, external key manipulation to immobilize him, and a well-placed Kienzan as the finishing touch would decisively end the battle. A guaranteed instant game over for Nappa. But the thing about this fight was that, despite having this nearly foolproof strategy at his disposal, he couldn't use it. Not because he was incapable, but because Nappa was never the problem. Ajax's eyes drifted over to Vegeta. He was the problem. If he took out Nappa prematurely, he would only hasten the inevitable confrontation with Vegeta, forcing himself to contend with the Prince of all Science solo. And while Ajax had confidence in the strength he had achieved thus far, he was not yet delusional enough to think he could take on the Prince of all Science should Vegeta take the field. Additionally, since Vegeta was still needed in the future, the instant kill strategy can't be utilized again.
Excite.
Unfortunately, that meant this battle was never about defeating Nappa outright, it was about stalling. He needed to drag out this fight, a task for which his abilities were uniquely suited for, and wait for Goku. Once Goku entered the fray, Vegeta would no longer be his problem, and Nappa's ass would be his. Figuratively speaking, of course, not literally. Fortunately, the silver lining was that he didn't need to be worried about sustaining excessive injuries during the stalling. Ajax smirked. That extra senzu bean sounded really useful right about now, didn't it? To be honest, it still annoyed him to think the senzu bean was originally used by Goku for stamina of all things. It was like he said before, sometimes one extra senzu bean could make all the difference. Stop smirking, Ajax. You haven't defeated me yet, Nappa muttered as he returned, his voice slightly distorted from his nose being bent in the wrong direction. With a pained grunt, Nappa forcefully jerked his nose back into place with a nasty crunch. Nappa took a moment to move his nose, testing it, before wiping away the blood on his face. I'll definitely feel this one tomorrow. Ajax assumed his combat stance, deliberately mirroring the iconic one Goku had taken during his confrontation with Vegeta, an event scheduled to occur a few hours from now if all goes according to plan. As expected, you didn't disappoint, Ajax, representative of God. Nappa exclaimed. Storm-forged mantle. Ajax blinked as even fiercer lightning suddenly enveloped Nappa, the crackling energy dancing around his form. What's with that cool-ass name? He wants one of those. With an echoing boom, both warriors vanished from their respective positions. Ajax flashed forward, leaving afterimages, while Nappa zoomed forth with a trail of lightning, not unlike the Flash. Ajax felt the difference almost immediately. Nappa's speed and force had increased significantly, and Ajax had a chilling realization that Nappa, now empowered by his technique, had become an adversary that he could barely keep up with. The electrifying shocks accompanying Nappa's movements not only increased the Scion's physical capabilities but also impeded Ajax's reaction speed, disrupting his ability to keep up with the accelerated pace of the battle. Shit. Ajax knew he could adapt to the electricity, but he wasn't sure if he had enough time. Nappa's electrified fist slammed into Ajax's face as a powerful backhand, momentarily stunning Ajax. In a strategic move, Nappa capitalized on the opening to grapple Ajax in a massive bear hug that trapped one of Ajax's arms against his chest. Ajax gritted his teeth, feeling the electricity coursing through him and lighting his nerves up like Christmas lights. He couldn't afford to stay in this vulnerable position for too long. Fortunately, despite one arm being trapped, the other remained free. Solar flare. A burst of radiant light erupted from Ajax, shrouding the battlefield in a blinding flash of light that forced Nappa to stumble back with a yell. Temporarily blinded by the intense light, the Scion Commander-General instinctively covered his eyes and released his hold on Ajax. Ajax, now freed from Nappa's grasp, seized the opportunity to regain his bearings. The lingering effects of the electricity, though only temporary, had left Ajax paralyzed, disrupting both his bodily and key functions. Ajax focused on swiftly regaining control over his physical and energy faculties. Once he managed to bring his bodily systems back online, Ajax made a quick decision to put some distance between himself and Nappa. With a burst of speed, he retreated into the air, rising as rapidly as his abilities allowed. However, this decision proved to be a mistake. Before Ajax could go far, Nappa, squinting and wincing from residual discomfort, shot forward with blistering speed and tightly gripped Ajax's ankle with a single outstretched hand. Ajax barely had time to tense his body before Nappa flexed his arms and forcefully slammed Ajax down into the ground, practically embedding him into the wasteland. Almost immediately, Nappa raised his foot to deliver a crushing stomp. Ajax, however, caught wind of the impending attack in the nick of time. With a swift and well-timed release of ki, Ajax ejected himself from his buried position, narrowly evading Nappa's stomp. As Nappa's foot struck the ground, the battlefield trembled from the immense force that would have been unleashed upon Ajax had he not managed to escape it. Ajax performed a swift flip to orient himself on his feet but found little reprieve. Before he could fully steady himself, Nappa crashed into his chest with formidable force and launched Ajax through the air into a nearby rock column. The sheer power of the collision brought the column crumbling down, engulfing Ajax in a swirling storm of dust and debris. Ajax gasped as he struggled to regain the wind that had been knocked out of him. Oh dear, he's getting overwhelmed. He needs to buy some time. Flexing his ki, Ajax harnessed the energy within him and unleashed a standard ki-eye, a focused burst of energy that materialized as a small shockwave. The ki-eye forced the great storm of dust to expand outward and concealed Ajax's figure from view. The dust storm that temporarily obscured Ajax did not stop Nappa one iota. Within seconds, Nappa burst into the swirling chaos, his eyes immediately snapping onto Ajax's form. Like a force of nature, Nappa charged forward, his fingers outstretched like some knock-off third rakeage. Ajax desperately struggled to evade Nappa's assault, but he ultimately came up short against the Scion's overwhelming speed. In an instant, Nappa's fingers effortlessly breached the swirling veil of dust, piercing through Ajax's defense and plunging deep into his stomach. Blood sprayed from Ajax's mouth as his body convulsed from having an entire arm buried deep into his body. Even as the lightning set his nerves ablaze with excruciating agony, Ajax felt Nappa's hand mercilessly digging around inside his stomach. Through the haze of pain, Ajax summoned the strength to look up, only to see his opponent's triumphant smirk. With a cruel twist of his arms, Nappa violently tore out a substantial portion of Ajax's spine, accompanied by a gruesome collection of internal organs. The Scion general, hands now drenched in blood, watched with grim satisfaction as Ajax collapsed to the ground bonelessly. The air was thick with the unmistakable scent of iron as Ajax gurgled incoherently on the floor. Blood spilled from his mouth in copious quantities, staining the ground red with the evidence of his grievous injuries. Nappa straightened to his full height and dismissed the storm-forged mantle technique. The crackling lightning that had surrounded him faded away, dissipating like a retreating storm. "Well fought, Ajax, representative of God," Nappa declared with a twisted sense of respect. "May you pass on with honor. If you have any last words, speak them now, and I shall remember them." Ajax, lying on the ground with his body broken and battered, coughed up blood as the dwindling life force within him waned. Despite the dire circumstances, he summoned the final vestiges of the strength within him to utter one last thing. "My last words." Fifine, a bloody smile, defiant in the face of impending death, stretched across Ajax's face. "This tea time, I won't bend my knees." With those words, Ajax succumbed to the embrace of the Grim Reaper. The light in his eyes faded, and his lifeless body slumped as his blood spread out in a crimson pool beneath him. As if the world itself was acknowledging the passing of a great warrior, the piercing sound of wind filled the air. It was a haunting, mournful melody that seemed to resonate with the collective weight of the battlefield's memories. Standing above Ajax, Nappa frowned deeply, his brows furrowing into deep wrinkles in his confusion. Bend his knee? Like kneeling? What? Cruel he may be, but he doesn't do humiliating shit like that to his fallen foes. Other sick bastards in the Frieza force like Chue, Dodoria, or Rikum, F*ck that guy, might, but not him, nor most scions he knows of. Not to be a grammar Nazi, but was this some kind of grammatically incorrect declaration of honor? Was Ajax attempting to convey that this time, he hadn't bent his knees? Nappa was abruptly jolted out of his contemplation as the cooling wetness on his hand, the residue of the crimson lifeblood that had stained his palms, suddenly disappeared. Bewilderment flashed across Nappa's features as he instinctively glanced down at his now clean hand. Nappa looked down just in time to see Ajax's corpse dissolving into a cascade of light particles. Nappa's eyebrows quirked upwards in surprise. Did the inhabitants of this planet not leave behind corpses or something? Standing in a state of utter bafflement, Nappa suddenly registered a faint whistling sound in the air once again. It was the unmistakable sound of wind that grew subtly loud. Wait. He was in a barren wasteland without any wind. A fraction of a second later, his instincts blared the loudest and most visceral warning they could give him. A primal surge of adrenaline coursed through Nappa's veins, urging him to act on instinct alone. When Nappa turned around, crossing his arms in a defensive stance, the only thing that met his gaze was a single foot. Oh shit! For everyone else on the battlefield, events played out differently. Of them, only Vegeta noticed an elusive figure departing from the dust cloud formed by Ajax's ki with great speed. The figure rapidly ascended into the sky, leaving behind no trace until it became a distant dot against the sky. As the dust settled, unveiling the shocking scene of Nappa standing over the fatally wounded Ajax to the horror of all those watching, a select few also managed to catch a fleeting glimpse of another figure descending from above. The mysterious figure descended with awe-inspiring speed, generating concentric shockwaves that rippled through the air, a phenomenon exclusively associated with objects far exceeding supersonic velocities. An ear-piercing whistling sound grew progressively louder as the form approached, causing every spectator on the battlefield to become keenly aware of its presence. Erasun did, Tien did, Gohan did, Vegeta did, and even Piccolo, who had just regained consciousness, did. Nappa eventually did too. Just a moment too late. For the second time in this battle, the blurring figure of Ajax slammed horrifically into Nappa's hastily erected defenses, this time in a picture-perfect drop kick. As a testament to the catastrophic power behind the attack, the collision carved out a crater, before expanding into an even larger one, moments after the first. The sheer momentum forced Nappa to one knee under the immense strain, and the earth gave way beneath him as he was driven into the unforgiving ground knees first. Nappa really regrets his decision to dismiss his storm-forged mantle. Oh, why did he do it? Nappa looks up at the perfectly straight leg that's causing him so much grief. Oh, so that's what he meant by not bending his knees. Pinpoint impact. Oh shit. Nappa's form was mercilessly crushed into the earth as the already meteoric force of the attack intensified. An involuntary growl of pain escaped his lips as he felt something in his arm crack and fractionally give way to the overwhelming pressure of the attack bearing down on him. Oh dear. Karma sure is a B*TCH, isn't she? Even as the earth practically disintegrated around him, Nappa's keen senses picked up on the continued movements of Ajax's hands. What the actual F*CK? Is this guy still not done? Nappa eyed Ajax's hands warily as they formed a triangle. His eyes widened in alarm as the initial sparks of light began to form within the confines of the hand sign. However, in this compromised position, with the majority of his body literally buried in the ground and his arms still desperately blocking the kick, there was absolutely nothing he could do at this point-blank range. Gonna. Oh shit. Chapter 45 Vegeta, you're going to lose. Ajax nimbly backpedaled from the colossal square cavity in the earth, the aftermath of his kickaho, as dust and rock cascaded around him like surreal rain. He still hadn't figured out why the hole was square, by the way. Some phenomena, it seemed, were destined to remain a mystery. As the dust settled, Ajax took a moment to steady himself with a series of deep breaths. That last exchange had been far too close for comfort. His agility had been just enough to clear the dissipating smoke before Nappa had charged in. Had he taken even a single second longer, Nappa would have seen two of him and caught onto the true nature of his multiform clone. A perilous outcome that could have cost Ajax dearly, as Nappa would have maintained his advantage. Regaining his breath, Ajax sensed the intensity of Vegeta's gaze boring into his back. Upon facing the Scion Prince, Ajax met Vegeta's stoic eyes defiantly, casually noting that Vegeta, and the area surrounding him, were completely unaffected by the tumultuous battle that had just occurred. Detecting motion, Ajax snapped his head back to Nappa. It looked like his combination attacks had taken a visible toll on the Scion general, who floated unsteadily out of the hole with a scowl. Nappa's left arm slightly dangled at his side, his armor was ravaged, shattered with a significant portion missing, and the other half of his mustache was gone. However, despite all of that, Nappa was raring to continue. Damn you. People like you are the reason why I'm bald. Ajax ignored Nappa's griping. Given Nappa's current condition, further battle would only lead to a lose-lose scenario. If he emerged victorious over Nappa, he would be left to contend with Vegeta. Game over. Conversely, if he was defeated by Nappa, then it was also game over, since, he lost. With Vegeta's focus temporarily on him, Ajax knew this was a good moment to set the next phase of his plan in motion, psychological warfare. Carefully maintaining his calm, Ajax chose his next words carefully. Nappa, Vegeta? The funny thing is, I haven't even revealed my full arsenal to you yet. That was a lie. Nappa had forced him to showcase a substantial part of it. I could have ended this battle effortlessly at almost any time. That, on the other hand, was the truth. Nappa's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, cycling through those actions repeatedly as he visibly struggled to formulate a response. Why didn't you? Vegeta took it upon himself to respond on Nappa's behalf. Ajax moistened his lips, unfurling his response with careful ease as he attempted to manipulate the narrative in his favor. Simple. Goku, oh, I suppose you call him Kakarot, hadn't even arrived yet, and he is undeniably the strongest of us. He won't disappoint. Vegeta, arms crossed in his customary posture, retorted with his usual skepticism and impatience. And why should I bother waiting? I can fight him regardless of whether you're all alive or dead. Ajax blinked. Okay, exploiting their desire for battle didn't work out. It's time to recalibrate his approach and go for Plan B, Pride. Because, Vegeta, you're going to lose. Vegeta's eyes instantly sharpened at the audacious statement like a nocturnal predator spotting its prey in the shadows of the night. Is that so? Vegeta's response was sharp. A silent battle of wills ensued between the two warriors as their eyes met. Then, Vegeta's lips twisted upwards, revealing teeth, his expression mocking. Interesting. You possess such confidence in Kakarot, enough to wager everything on a mere low-class warrior prevailing against the most powerful scion in generations. Ajax kept Vegeta's gaze unflinchingly. Don't you want to see for yourself? Vegeta stared at Ajax for a painfully long moment. Then, Vegeta's lips curled from a mocking smile into a malevolent grin as the Scion Prince erupted in laughter. You know, the funny thing is, I know you're playing me, but you're right. Turning to Nappa, Vegeta outlined his plan. Nappa, we're going to allow Kakarot some time to return. I want to see just how magical he is to inspire such steadfast faith. I will relish witnessing their faces crumble from despair when their hero lies broken before me. It will also provide us with the opportunity to confirm the authenticity of the Dragon Ball's power. Once Nappa affirmed his consent, Vegeta shot a sidelong glance at Ajax. How much longer until your so-called hero shows up? Well, Ajax saw no reason to downplay the estimated timeframe. 4 hours. My patience is limited, Vegeta immediately shot back. 3.5. Don't push your luck. I will not wait that long just to prove you wrong. 1 hour, Vegeta declared, the intensity in his eyes leaving no room for further debate. What? How does that even? Fine, 3 hours. Ajax swallowed with difficulty, nervous as he realized his attempt to negotiate for more time had backfired disastrously. He got too greedy and he's now forced to scavenge for a more reasonable duration. Vegeta, however, remained resolute, unwilling to entertain any further waiting. 1 hour, he repeated, his uncompromising tone marking the finality of his decision. Ajax scowled as panic gripped him, a reaction that didn't escape Vegeta's notice. The Scion Prince narrowed his eyes at Ajax's unease. You're panicking. Clearly, you have no clue when Kakarot will show up. If you're bluffing, we might as well kill you right here. Of course, I'm panicking. You said 1 hour. He's on his way, but he won't be arriving that soon. Very well. 2 hours or now. Choose. Sigh. Fine, 2 hours. Caught between the threat of imminent death and a reduced time frame, Ajax reluctantly conceded, resigned at his choice. Nappa, who had patiently held back during the exchange to avoid interrupting Vegeta, finally erupted in outrage. Ajax, screw you. What do you mean you could have offed me whenever you pleased? What? Ajax arched an eyebrow as he turned to Nappa, puzzled by the sudden outburst. It's just one thing after another today. I respected you and treated you like an equal, but you insult me instead? How dare you tarnish my pride like this? Nappa bared his teeth, practically snarling out his words. What are you playing at? What are you even talking about? When we Scions fight our equals, it's always full throttle. We give it our all. Holding back is an insult to your opponent and their strength. How dare you not unleash your full power against me? Am I not worthy of your respect? Well, I don't need your damn pity. Nappa's face twisted, and his clenched fists trembled with fury, wounded pride seething within. Okay, or? You say you respect me and treat me as an equal, but aren't you also handicapping yourself by not using any key attacks? Nappa's anger instantly deflated as the realization washed over him, dissipating like air escaping a punctured balloon. He stammered. Your anger has no ground to stand on, Nappa. It's only fair, considering you weren't fighting at your best either. Vegeta tapped his fingers against his arms as he leaned against his rock. The native had only half of your power level, yet he played you like a fiddle. Stand down and accept your defeat. This battle belongs to him. Nappa's demeanor shifted abruptly in response to Vegeta's words. Guilt washed over his features, and his eyes drifted everywhere but in Ajax's direction. Look, shit, I didn't mean to do that, alright? I apologize for not going all out. I didn't intend to imply that you're weak, and I certainly didn't mean to insult your pride. Ajax inclined his head slightly at the insight into the Scion's cultural values and acknowledged the sincerity in Nappa's words. Ajax can appreciate Nappa's readiness to admit fault. It speaks for his character when he willingly apologizes for his own mistakes. Too many people in the world don't. It's fine. Earth's values are slightly different than Scion values. Following that, Vegeta closed his eyes, and his posture eased slightly as he leaned against the rock he had kicked up. Nappa followed Vegeta's lead and settled down beside the Scion Prince, tending to his injuries. And so, the countdown began. 45 minutes since intermission. And that's the rundown of everything that went down. Ajax finished his summary of events since his arrival. Dude, I can't believe you actually went toe-to-toe with him and almost beat him all on your own. Are you okay? Krillin placed a hand on Ajax's shoulder with both amazement and concern. Yeah, just running low on ki. fired off a Kikaho and lost a multiform clone, so I just need a moment, or a few hours in full honesty, to recharge my energy, Ajax explained, exhaustion lining his voice. Suddenly, Ajax's head perked up as he recalled something he had neglected to mention to the group. Oh, by the way, Yajirobe isn't coming. Are you King serious? Tien wasn't the sole person to react, as a chorus of disappointed sighs and general, collective disbelief rippled through the group. The only exceptions were Piccolo and Gohan, as neither of the two was familiar with who Yajirobe was. Unfortunately, Ajax confirmed. Ajax's eyes traced the contours of a distant crater as his mind wandered. Fortunately, the rest of the group had brought him up to speed on developments during his brief absence, and only a few of the recounted events had captured his attention. Yamcha had somehow met his end again, this time at the hands of Vegeta. Despite it technically not being Yamcha's fault, the outcome was still the result of his overconfidence. Ajax shook his head in disbelief. Apparently, it really was Yamcha's fate to get the short end of the stick. Yamcha leads to the Prince of all Science himself. This version of Vegeta seemed to be more bound by honor than the ruthless cruelty he was depicted to possess in the canon. All things considered, this was rather good news, as honor tends to have individuals behave in relatively predictable, and therefore exploitable ways. R.I.P. Yamcha, this is why information is important. Unexpectedly, Nappa took a liking to Gohan and found himself in a mentorship role, which is something he should be able to exploit too later on. From what Ajax managed to hear of Nappa's lessons from Gohan, it was actually pretty good advice, all things considered. Can't say Ajax expected this outcome though. On the topic of science, Gohan's tail remained missing, and Ajax was not holding on to hope that it might miraculously reappear at a convenient moment. Unfortunately, reality doesn't work like that, and such serendipitous moments exist only in stories. Ajax registered all these details and he fine-tuned his enemies' mental profiles as well as his battle plans accordingly. As he did so, Ajax distinctly sensed the intense looks Vegeta and Nappa were shooting him, one laden with cold calculation, the other tinged with bewilderment and disbelief. Even without direct eye contact, Ajax can perceive their curiosity and confusion at the seemingly inexplicable resurrection of their fallen foes, all reinvigorated and lively. In the end, Ajax had to use both senzu beans, dividing them into 4 halves. It was impossible for him to withhold said senzu beans after disclosing to everyone he possessed 2. Such an act would be far too callous, even for him. Kairatsu and Krillin each received half a senzu bean, while Tien had the third. Unfortunately, it appeared that half a senzu bean could only partially but not fully recover Tien's hand. Though it remained functional to some extent, it certainly was not dexterous by any sense of the word. Initially, the plan was for Piccolo to utilize the last half of the senzu bean, but the collective consensus had decided for Ajax to receive the precious resource to restore his own ki instead. Though the rationale behind this decision was sound, Ajax being the strongest among them, and replenishing his energy would undoubtedly enhance their overall chances of success the most, the decision had left Ajax with a twinge of guilt. After all, never mind. He hadn't eaten the remaining half of the bean just yet, there was another objective he wanted to achieve before doing so. Abruptly, there was movement from the Science side. It appeared that Nappa was growing restless in the absence of anyone to engage with. All of the Z fighters watched, tense, as a bored Nappa leisurely strolled over, directing his attention towards Gohan in particular, and nonchalantly took a seat among them. The Z fighters exchanged weird glances before awkwardly staring at Nappa as he settled in their midst, sticking out like a sore thumb. The entire time, Nappa, seemingly oblivious to the awkwardness he brought, sat casually as if his recent attempt to unalive everyone around him had never occurred. With animated enthusiasm, he proceeded to engage Gohan in a spirited one-sided conversation about the young Scion's untapped potential. Haha, you've got the makings of greatness. Nappa's eyes gleamed with genuine excitement as he envisioned a bright future for Gohan that only he could see. I can train you to become an elite warrior, just like I trained Vegeta. Although, I have to admit that he didn't really need my training to grow to his current height. Vegeta, who had been growing increasingly irritated at Nappa's fraternization, couldn't let that ambiguous comment slide. He shot Nappa a narrow, side-eyed glance, a look that Nappa, a seasoned navigator of the treacherous waters that is Vegeta's moods, promptly caught. Nappa immediately clarified. The current height of his power, I mean. Piccolo squinted skeptically. He wasn't buying into this absurd show of camaraderie and had no intention of allowing Gohan to be duped by some sweet words. Is this some kind of good guy, bad guy scam? Are you attempting to honeypot Gohan? At the statement, Krillin choked on nothing, coughing as he cleared his throat. I think you've got the wrong idea about what a honeypot is, Piccolo, Krillin said with a startled laugh. Ignoring Krillin's comment, Piccolo remained focused on the important matter at hand. He looked at Gohan intently, attempting to silently communicate his concerns through his eyes. Don't associate yourself with the enemy. They are here with the intent to annihilate and lay waste to the entire planet. To Piccolo's great irritation, Nappa continued with his enthusiastic conversation with Gohan as if Piccolo's words of caution had been mere background noise. Energetically, Nappa delved into the Scion's rich history, recounted their conquests, and the pride associated with being a member of the most powerful race in the universe. Caught between Nappa's charismatic storytelling and Piccolo's stern warning, Gohan could only listen uncomfortably, nodding along not out of agreement but as a diplomatic gesture. Ajax, visibly exasperated, rolled his eyes and tuned out Nappa's enthusiastic spiel. On top of the anxiety about whether Goku would arrive on time, he had to endure Nappa's zealous monologue on Scion propaganda and Gohan's latent potential too. Ugh. You have immense potential, blah blah blah. I'll mold you into an elite warrior, so remember my lessons. Blah blah, that's the true Scion spirit, blah blah blah. I was once the Ace Royal Academy trainer, so trust me when I say I know what I'm talking about. Ajax's head snapped in Nappa's direction. Wait, what was that? Unaware of Ajax's sudden attention, Nappa carried on with his spirited narrative with an air of pride and nostalgia. I was once the foremost trainer in Scion society, with the highest number of elite warrior children successfully trained under my belt. Nappa laughed boastfully as he puffed out his chest with pride. My track record was so exceptional that I earned the prestigious honor of being Prince Vegeta's personal mentor. I probably spent more time with Vegeta than King Vegeta himself, haha. Ajax was left utterly confounded. What the F***ck was this backstory? It was the first time he had ever heard of such a thing. Ajax gave Nappa a weird look, suddenly feeling like he was staring at a complete stranger. Were any of the things he thought he knew about Nappa even accurate? Nappa was quick to notice Ajax's bewildered expression, misinterpreted it as disbelief, and swiftly arrived at an incorrect conclusion. Nappa's pride, seemingly wounded by Ajax's unspoken skepticism, began to smolder with indignation. Oi! Ajax concealed a subtle grimace at the Scion general's intense glare. Oof, he must have hit a nerve. Oh, you little shit. Nappa jabbed a finger at his bald head and flexed his muscles with pride. You took one glance at my bald head and these magnificent muscles, and immediately assumed I was some dumbass muscle-brained brute, didn't you? Well, screw you for judging me based on appearance. I'll have you know I'm an intellectual. Ajax thought he might have heard Vegeta clear his throat. Nappa continued without missing a beat. At fighting? No, I'm quite certain you're just a dumbass, Piccolo remarked drily. You think you're all safe now, huh? I'll show you. Fight me. Nappa surged to his feet, his face contorted with anger, unable to tolerate the disrespect from the Namekian of all people. As he stood, his left arm hung somewhat loosely. Nappa, Vegeta sternly snapped, leveling a sharp look toward his subordinate. We don't break our word. We granted them 2 hours, so we'll abide by it. Control yourself. Reluctantly complying with Vegeta's order, Nappa sank back into his seat on the ground with a thud. As Nappa took his seat, Piccolo couldn't resist throwing one final jab and snubbed Nappa again. Listen to your superior, brute. Oh ho, I'm going to enjoy killing you once we're through with the Dragon Balls, slug. Then, because Nappa didn't think his verbal parting shot was enough for the Namekian, who had been a constant pain in his ass, he flipped Piccolo off too. In the wake of that, there was nothing but mutual animosity as the two glared murder at each other. Ajax flicked his eyes from Nappa and Piccolo's petty argument over to Vegeta. The Scion Prince's earlier statement had been very interesting. Ajax raised his voice, speaking to Vegeta a short distance away. Your word means a lot to you. Vegeta scoffed dismissively at the question but eventually replied, I never break my promises. Ajax shivered at the intensity of that declaration. It was clear he had touched upon something deeply significant to Vegeta. For now, though, Ajax was content with the assurance that Vegeta was committed to keeping his promise. A twinge of pain coursed through Ajax as he shifted uncomfortably in his spot. It reminded him of one thing he needed to take care of concerning Nappa. Unlike Vegeta, pride wasn't Nappa's defining trait, so Ajax had to devise a different approach. Fortunately, he knew just what to say to achieve his objective. Hey Nappa, can I take another look at that storm-something mantle of yours? Nappa disengaged from the intense glaring contest with Piccolo, turning his head toward Ajax. No. But it was seriously badass. Besides, I'm sure Gohan would love to see it too. Ajax subtly winked at Gohan whenever Nappa's attention wavered. Nappa turned to Gohan, who had grasped the message and was nodding rather vigorously. Nappa stroked his chin in skepticism as his suspicious gaze darted between Gohan and Ajax repeatedly. His instincts informed him that he might be walking into a trap, but he couldn't for the life of him figure out what it was. Fine, Nappa reluctantly conceded. With a theatrical flourish, he rose from his seat and a visible electrical aura enveloped him in a dramatic display of power. That's exactly what Ajax wanted. Capitalizing on the moment, he advanced toward Nappa, grabbed the Scion's hands firmly, and started shaking them vigorously like an overenthusiastic fanboy at some meet-and-greet event. Ajax gritted his teeth as he endured the electricity surging through him. Nappa, on the other hand, was taken aback by the unexpectedly bold and socially awkward gesture and instinctively attempted to retract his hands. However, Ajax's tight grip thwarted Nappa's attempt and trapped him in the extremely uncomfortable handshake. As the electricity visibly dealt more and more damage to Ajax, Nappa's face contorted into an expression of clear disgust. Leaning backward in discomfort from Ajax's unsettling behavior, he held out his hands, still ensnared in Ajax's grasp, as if they had been contaminated with cooties. "You're really giving me Rikum vibes," Nappa started, but abruptly cut himself short when he sensed Vegeta's killing intent directed at him. Realizing he was once again treading on sensitive grounds, he hastily corrected himself mid-sentence. "I mean, you know who vibes right now." As Ajax reached the threshold of his endurance, he finally released his grip on Nappa's hand. Involuntarily, he jerked away, all coordination lost as the electrical currents wreaked havoc on his nerves. Smoke began to rise from Ajax's form from the sheer heat as he erratically twitched and stumbled away from Nappa, resembling an uncoordinated marionette. Watching all this with a dumbfounded expression, Nappa's jaw dropped in sheer, disgusted bamboozlement, his brain going into blue-screen mode as he struggled to comprehend the utter absurdity of Ajax's actions. In an extremely belated moment of clarity, Nappa's brain helpfully reminded him that this entire awkward situation could have been easily avoided if he had just turned his technique off. Freaking hindsight, where were you a minute ago? With a casual flick of his mental switch, Nappa deactivated the technique, abruptly cutting off the flow of electricity around him. Nappa's expression turned weird as he watched Ajax collapse to his knees. With an expression of genuine concern, he leaned down towards Gohan. "Gohan, please don't grow up to be weird like this one." Shooting another uneasy glance at Ajax, Nappa shivered and swiftly speedwalked back toward Vegeta. He's not sure what's happening over here, but whatever it was, he doesn't want to be a part of it. You know, just in case it was contagious. While Nappa swiftly returned to rejoin Vegeta, realization dawned on many Z fighters as they understood the significance of Ajax's maneuver. With Nappa's attention now diverted, Ajax took the opportunity to retrieve his half of the Senzu bean. Fumbling slightly, he placed it in his mouth, shifting the half Senzu bean within in his mouth before carefully biting down on it. He certainly doesn't want to make a mistake here. In a flash, the Senzu bean worked its restorative magic. Most of the battle-inflicted injuries on Ajax vanished, and the damage of the earlier electrical shock disappeared as well. However, only a portion of his depleted ki reserves had been replenished. As expected, he had only eaten half of the bean after all. Ajax flexed his hand experimentally, testing his renewed strength. Excellent. His strategic move had been a success. If he faced Nappa's lightning again, it wouldn't pose the same challenge it had been in their prior encounter. Pleased with the outcome, Ajax couldn't suppress a satisfied smile. The icing on the cake? Nappa had absolutely no idea what just happened. Chapter 46, Apples. 55 minutes since intermission. Nappa remained seated next to Vegeta, staring at Ajax intensely with squinted eyes. The moment he turned back just minutes ago, all the injuries resulting from the electrical shock and the previous battle had already miraculously vanished on Ajax's body. Nappa couldn't understand what in the world was happening. Why was everything so goddamn weird on this planet? People didn't leave corpses when they die, they can detect energy like a freaking scouter, and now they can just spontaneously heal too. Was it really something in the water? Propping his chin on his hand like the thinker, Nappa fell into deep contemplation as he attempted to dissect the situation. He must be missing a crucial piece of this puzzle. It couldn't possibly be a universal ability, since none of the other weaklings had demonstrated it. There had to be restrictions too, as not all of them had shown signs of recovery. Gohan and the Namekian, for instance, didn't, but then again, neither of them were native to this planet. Nappa squinted thoughtfully, his eyes practically turning into slits. He doesn't get it. What's healing them? What were the activation conditions and what were the constraints? Nappa refused to believe he was fighting actual immortals, which, now that he thinks about it, he couldn't dismiss either. especially since the locals had access to the Dragon Balls for God knows how long. Nappa winced as he inadvertently jostled his arm, the physical discomfort forcing a hiss from him. Since all conversation had ground to a halt when Nappa returned to Vegeta's side, his hiss had momentarily disrupted the heavy silence that had draped over the battlefield like a thick blanket. This was also why it was so startling loud when Nappa's stomach growled clamorously moments later. Nappa released a colossal sigh as his hunger chased all thoughts of his analysis from his mind. "I'm so hungry." Next to Nappa, Vegeta cast a displeased sidelong glance at his subordinate, as if Nappa's admission of hunger was a sign of weakness. However, Nappa's words triggered Gohan to recall something. He reached into the folds of his GI and retrieved the red apple he had tucked away during his earlier training session with Piccolo. A chorus of incredulous reactions rippled through the group as the out-of-place fruit, pristine and untouched, sat in Gohan's hand. Gohan held the apple up with a sheepish smile. "Well, I guess I was saving it for later." But how did that thing survive unharmed? Piccolo's usual stoicism momentarily wavered from bewilderment as he beheld the fruit with a raised eyebrow. Wait. You've been carrying that on you this entire time." Krillin mirrored Piccolo as his eyes bulged in disbelief. Gohan squirmed uncomfortably beneath everyone's scrutinizing gazes as he felt his guilt crawl into his stomach and promptly die there. The truth was that the apple had remained unscathed because he hadn't actively participated in any intense combat. He had sat there like a potato, watching Mr. Piccolo and everyone else get taken apart. In an effort to diffuse the escalating awkwardness that he was being bombarded with, Gohan decided to toss the apple over to Nappa. "Here you go, Mr. Nappa," he offered, subtly steering the focus away from the circumstances of the apple's survival. Nappa effortlessly snagged the apple out of the air in a single fluid motion, cradling it within his massive hand. The Scion warrior examined the ordinary fruit with great intensity, turning it this way and that as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He brought it to his nose and sniffed it but detected nothing of note. Gripping the stem firmly between his fingers, Nappa twisted it off, then immediately held the fruit at arm's length away from his face, as if bracing for some catastrophic explosion. Nothing happened. It may seem odd of him to exercise such caution, but after traversing the universe as extensively as he had, well, let's just say he'd seen some sh*t. Exploding fruits, as it turned out, were surprisingly commonplace in the universe. Most of the time, they're poisonous too. "Is this an apple?" Nappa lifted the fruit in his hand towards the light, the sun's rays reflecting off its red skin. Gohan looked surprised. In fact, everyone looked surprised. "You know what they are, Mr. Nappa?" "Raditz said I would enjoy these when I was eavesdropping on him," Nappa offered by way of explanation. He turned a rather serious and somewhat alert gaze to Gohan. "Is this a poisoned variant or something?" "I think those only existed in fairy tales and children's stories." Gohan, honest to a fault, shook his head in response. Nappa, immediately reassured by Gohan's words, burst into hearty laughter. "Haha. As a fellow Scion warrior, I trust your honor." To Vegeta's genuine shock and disbelief, Nappa proceeded to take a massive bite out of the apple with gusto, his teeth audibly crunching through the crisp fruit. Juices from the apple dribbled down the corner of Nappa's lips as a result of his enormous bite. "What the foo? Are you dumb, Nappa?" Vegeta can viscerally feel his irritation driving up his blood pressure. He cannot believe this fool would be so carefree as to actually trust the words of their enemies at face value. "Oha shit. This is the good stuff." As Nappa continued to chew, an expression of pure delight dominated his face. He was beyond ecstatic about the apple, and he just had to share it with Vegeta. "Vegeta, you've got to try this. It's even better than that fruit from Helheim that I never shut up about." In response, Vegeta, who, by all measures, should have been accustomed to Nappa's eccentricities, could only muster a stupefied expression at the sheer idiocy of his comrade's actions. Deciding that he might as well fully commit to his action, Gohan rose to his feet, patting himself down as he pointed confidently in a specific direction. "There's a whole grove of apple trees just below a mountain in that direction, Mr. Nappa." Nappa swiveled his head toward Gohan so fast he almost snapped his neck. His eyes were sparkling as if Gohan had told him that Frieza Day would come early. Unable to contain his excitement, he shot into the sky with surprising speed for an injured individual. "Vegeta, I'll be Bayarak," he shouted, his voice fading as he soared into the distance towards the presumed grove of apple trees. Vegeta, filled to the brim with aggrieved annoyance, scowled murderously as he glowered at the Z-fighters. Unwilling to be associated with the absurdity of the situation or acknowledge Nappa's actions, he chose instead to lean against his rock in stony silence, his pride only barely suppressing his underlying irritation. 20 minutes later, Nappa descended from the sky rather comically. Apples were haphazardly crammed into every available crevice of his broken armor, with many spilling out at the slightest movement due to the sheer quantity. As he flew, his tail ingeniously formed a makeshift basket, carefully balancing a small pile of apples. However, the most astonishing sight was Nappa himself, a fresh apple clenched in his teeth and both arms firmly gripping two whole, unrooted apple trees. Nappa landed with a thud, and without missing a beat, he slammed the two apple trees into the ground, planting them upright. The impact caused a cascade of apples to tumble down, one of which bounced off of Vegeta's head. Vegeta cast an absolutely scathing glare at Nappa, one that encapsulated the entirety of the frustration and annoyance that had been accumulated thus far. Vegeta was perilously close to the fraying ends of his patience with Nappa. There was fraternization, and then there was making a fool of oneself, and Nappa had unmistakably crossed the line between the two. What AF *king embarrassment. Vegeta's hand twitched, literally itching to erase Nappa from existence. He felt as if he were merely 3 seconds away from turning into a Super Saiyan of legend. Given the intensity of his rage, Vegeta wouldn't have been surprised if he actually did. Nappa immediately cowered under Vegeta's murderous glare, recognizing the depth and intensity of his prince's displeasure. With a shy and sheepish expression, Nappa extended an apple toward Vegeta. The Saiyan prince snatched the fruit from Nappa's hand with an angry swipe, biting into it with a resounding crunch. Nappa flung a handful of apples to Gohan, and only Gohan, extending a metaphorical olive branch to the young Saiyan. Recovering from Vegeta's initial reaction, Nappa settled down beside him and launched a voracious assault on the apples. The sounds of enthusiastic crunching and munching replaced the prior silence as Nappa devoured the fruits with unrestrained gusto. After plowing through a substantial number of fruits, Nappa interrupted his apple conquest and turned towards a less livid Vegeta, who remained engrossed in silent contemplation. Nappa mustered the courage to broach a peculiar subject. "Hey Vegeta," Nappa began tentatively, "what are your thoughts on adopting the kid?" He gestured toward Gohan with his chin, who had shared his apples with the other Z-fighters and was enjoying a few himself. Vegeta remained silent, steadfastly refusing to acknowledge Nappa's attempts to draw him into conversation, his focus fixated on some distant point on the horizon. "We could consider this planet as a vacation home," Nappa continued enthusiastically. "Or maybe a secret headquarters. The scenery is fantastic, the locals are genetically compatible, and most importantly, it's abundant with apples. It's a prime piece of real estate, even by cold Empire standards." Nappa waited for a response, but none came. Vegeta had staunchly ignored him. "Vegeta? Vegeta? Vegeta?" Nappa kept his gaze on Vegeta, patiently waiting for a response that appeared increasingly unlikely to arrive. After an uncomfortable stretch of silence, Nappa finally relented, realizing Vegeta was determined to refuse to entertain the notion. With a casual shrug, Nappa dropped the topic and refocused on his primary mission, devouring apples. And so, time continued to pass, with Nappa occasionally disappearing into the canopy to pluck a few more apples for himself. 1 hour, 55 minutes after intermission. An air of unease permeated through the Z-fighters as they exchanged nervous glances, the tension mounting as the seconds ticked away. The critical moment approached, yet Goku was still nowhere to be seen. Across from them, the Saiyan general was utterly unfazed by the tension. He rose to his feet, casually stretching his massive muscles with nonchalant readiness as he wiped away any apple remains from himself. Amidst the group, Ajax remained seated with his chin resting on his hand, seemingly calm but lost in thoughts. His silent demeanor contrasted sharply with the escalating tension around him, prompting the Z-fighters to cast glances his way in search of some sign or reassurance. Contrary to appearances, Ajax wasn't as composed as he appeared. His mind raced furiously for potential strategies to stall for time. He knew that Goku couldn't be too far away since he had been granted the Nimbus early and had the advantage of traversing the Snake Way while deceased. Fortunately, Ajax didn't have to dwell on it for long. "Hey Ajax, I just got to the lookout with Kami, and I'm racing over on Nimbus right now. Is everyone okay?" Goku practically shouted through the newly created mental channel. Ajax's eyes widened upon hearing Goku's voice through the mental connection, feeling the immense pressure on him lighten with those words. Goku would arrive soon. "Goku, you have no idea how glad I am to hear you. It's bad, but everyone is still alive except Yamcha. Gohan is alright, he's not hurt. Huru, that's still manageable. Yamcha is on his first death, so we can still bring him back with the Dragon Balls." Goku audibly sighed in relief, clearly uplifted by the news that almost everyone was still alive. "I knew I was right. If anyone has their head on their shoulders or has a plan, it's you, Ajax. While the trust was flattering and all, Ajax wasn't in the mood for compliments at the moment. There were more immediate concerns that he needed to address. The word is manageable, but forget that. How long until you get here, Goku? Soon? You know I'm not good with time. With Nimbus, Goku should arrive at your present location within approximately 20 minutes. Fortunately, Kami was able to provide a more precise timeline, though he scared Ajax slightly since Ajax wasn't aware his mentor was on the connection as well. Well done stalling for time, disciple. Can you hold on for that much longer? Ajax closed his eyes, recentering himself as he briefly ran the calculations of the remaining time through his mind. 5 minutes until the battle resumed, so there were 15 minutes of combat until Goku arrived. Ajax opened his eyes with quiet confidence. I'll take care of it. That's reassuring to hear. Kami seemed relieved by the confidence in Ajax's voice. Sensing the conclusion of the conversation, Goku chimed in. Do you have anything for me, Ajax? You had a rough plan for me to follow last time with Raditz. Yes, I do, Goku. Ajax had developed a general plan, technically more like a concise list of advice than a plan, that hopefully would assist Goku in his battle against Vegeta. I knew it. You always have a plan. Lay it on me, Ajax. What do I need to know? There were only a few key points Ajax needed to convey to Goku. Although he had additional insights to share, he lacked any plausible explanation for knowing Goku's precise strength or the techniques he had learned from King Kai without making up some wild claims. He felt somewhat constrained in that regard. Goku, 2 things. When you approach, lower your power level. Aim for somewhere around 3 times Raditz's maximum if you're stronger than that. It positions you as the strongest among us, but not high enough to spook the Science into doing something unpredictable. The ultimate objective, of course, was to prevent Vegeta from taking any preemptive measures or stepping into battle himself. If Goku's power was too high, Vegeta might eliminate them himself to avoid any potential interference when he faces Goku. Conversely, if Goku's power was too low, Vegeta might react with aggression due to some perceived dishonor for being lied to and thus endangering the group. R.I.P. Yamcha, thank you for your sacrifice, or he wouldn't have known this AU Vegeta's fixation on honor. Alternatively, if Goku were to emerge as the strongest among them, but the Prince of All Science was confident that Nappa could reasonably handle Goku, then he wouldn't even bother dealing with the Z-fighters personally. As Vegeta had said, he wanted to see the Z-fighters' faces crumble in despair. Vegeta would learn of his erroneous assumption after Goku's arrival, but by then, Vegeta wouldn't be Ajax's problem. Ajax continued with his advice. The other thing, Goku, is to be aware that their tails aren't their weaknesses like Raditz was, so avoid relying on the paralyzing strategy. Also, keep in mind that their resilience is pretty absurd. Never assume they're defeated outright because more often than not, they're still a threat, patiently waiting for an opportunity to catch you off guard. Okay, I got it. See you soon, Ajax. With those words, the mental transmission came to an end. Despite the seemingly long conversation, the entire exchange had taken only a mere handful of seconds. Ajax rose from his seat, stretching and steeling himself for the upcoming rematch against Nappa. While stretching, Ajax transmitted a discreet telepathic message to the Z-fighters. Hey everyone, don't react to the following message. It's good news, but we don't want to tip off the Science. Goku will be arriving in 15. From the corner of his eye, Ajax noted that none of the Z-fighters had displayed any visible signs of receiving the message, even Gohan. Good. There was no need for Vegeta and Nappa to be privy to Goku's timetable. While it's a minor advantage, restricting the flow of information to keep their enemies in the dark was an easy one to obtain, and Ajax wasn't about to turn down any advantage he could secure. Now, he just needed to brief everyone on his plan. You got any bright ideas for us, brat? Piccolo's gruff voice interrupted Ajax. Much like Goku, Piccolo remembered the advice Ajax had provided during the encounter with Raditz. Or Ajax can be asked for his plan. He wouldn't mind being the designated strategist. After all, he was the only one with the advantage of hindsight. For all of you, maintain as much distance as possible. To wipe away his previous defeat, Nappa will want to re-establish his dominance early on, so he'll likely start with something powerful and destructive. Probably a key attack, given that he's no longer restrained from using them. Following that, everyone should look for opportunities to bombard him with anything you all have from a distance. As he weakens, he'll become more vulnerable to such attacks. We can help fight him too, Ajax. Krillin clenched his fists with determination. Ajax turned to face Krillin, his expression stern. He can appreciate Krillin's fierce loyalty, but no offense to his senpai, that was the dumbest suggestion he had heard all day. No, you'll get in my way. I need to be the one engaging him physically to absorb as many blows as possible. But, Krillin seemed frustrated as he hesitated. Krillin, listen to Ajax, Tien interrupted, his arms crossing over his chest. I've seen him fight Nappa, and they are on a completely different level than us right now. Krillin's expression twisted into a grimace as the words sank in. Deep down, he knew that he was outclassed in terms of raw power. The memory of being taken out by a single hit in his previous encounter with Nappa was still fresh in his mind, and he had never been so acutely aware of his own limitations as he was now. Krillin hesitated but ultimately nodded in agreement. I understand your frustration, Krillin, but the fact of the matter is, my body's ability is better suited to endure physical punishment than anyone else's. Ajax placed a reassuring hand on Krillin's shoulder. If you want to help me, you need to focus on providing support from a distance. Time's up, pipsqueaks. Nappa's booming voice shattered the tense silence. I don't know what kind of charades you're all playing, but your hero hasn't arrived and words won't save you anymore. Nappa's eyes gleamed with predatory intensity, and the air around him thickened with an ominous bloodlust as his power radiated outward. The Z fighters tightened their stances, bracing themselves for the imminent clash. Chapter 47. Keep your damn distance. Nappa's calculating eyes tracked Ajax as the young warrior boldly advanced to the forefront of the Z fighters. Nappa could appreciate the strategic decision. Sending Ajax as the vanguard was a wise choice, as among their ranks, Ajax stood as the sole contender capable of genuinely confronting and matching him head-on. Tearing off the remnants of his shattered armor, he flexed his left arm, a subdued growl escaping him as pain coursed through him. While Ajax's earlier ferocious pinpoint impact had left his left arm somewhat incapacitated, it won't hinder him too much. Despite the injury, the arm hadn't fully lost its functionality, and that was enough for him. He had battled through worse injuries in the past after all. With a sudden burst of energy, he activated Storm-Forged Mantle, and an intimidating aura of electricity rippled over his form, amplifying the intensity of his presence. Ajax adopted a focused stance of his own, his energy pulsing around him with disciplined intensity. His senses sharpened as he gauged the distance between him and Nappa. In a sudden surge of speed, Ajax propelled himself toward his adversary, the ground beneath him fracturing and shattering under the sheer force of his acceleration. Nappa was certainly no spring chicken. He was a seasoned veteran in combat, and he could guess at Ajax's strategy. Now that Ajax wasn't fighting solo, the best strategy would be to intercept Nappa to prevent him from targeting the more fragile Z fighters. It was a shrewd move, if Nappa had still been restricted from energy attacks, that is. As Ajax reached the midpoint between them, Nappa raised a single hand, a dark grin stretching across his face as he directed 2 fingers upward. Nappa savored the satisfaction that enveloped him as he witnessed Ajax's eyes widen. That's right, pipsqueak, he was no longer restricted to melee. Volcanic explosion. In an instant, the air around Nappa became charged with energy, causing the very ground beneath them to convulse violently. Without warning, the entire area in front of Nappa erupted in an enormous explosion, fiery tendrils of energy ascending toward the sky. The deafening roar and scorching heat emanating from the explosion could be heard and felt across the battlefield. Nappa's smile transformed into a sly smirk. This was his signature technique, the move that many had remembered him for. It was the very same move that had laid waste to megacities and entire civilizations. This should have killed all of, oh shit. Nappa's confidence faltered for a split second as a sudden wave of dread washed over him. Had he unleashed his volcanic explosion with too much force? Did he accidentally kill Gohan too? Before Nappa could shed a single strand of hair in worry, Ajax burst from the billowing aftermath of the volcanic explosion. Despite looking much worse for wear, his attire singed and tattered, Ajax pressed onward, momentum unbroken by the powerful ki attack. Ajax's and Nappa's fists collided with great force, the wind howling around them and dispersing any lingering smoke as the impact of their attacks nullified each other. The battlefield crackled with electric energy as Nappa and Ajax locked each other into a fierce exchange of blows. Nappa scowled, his confusion morphing into irritation as Ajax only flinched lightly in response to the electric charge coursing through him. What was this bullshit? The electricity of his technique was a formidable weapon in its own right and wasn't just for show. However, something had changed, as Ajax now seemed capable of resisting the once devastating electricity. Why had his lightning suddenly turned less effective? Was it the apples? In the midst of the furious melee, a small blast rammed into Nappa's face, causing him to momentarily stagger in surprise. The unexpected impact momentarily diverted his focus from the intense engagement with Ajax to the origin of the attack, a figure suspended in mid-air at a considerable distance. It was the tiny white midget. Nappa's eyes darted to the airborne assembly of Z fighters, also positioned at a secure distance, Gohan being among them. Relief washed over him as he noted the young scion's unharmed state. While it was good that Gohan was fine, a wave of irritation quickly followed. Did his initial attack not manage to do a single damn thing? Were all of them able to immediately retreat or something? How the hell did they anticipate his move? A forceful blow struck his jaw, forcing his head to swivel to the side while another punch buried itself into his stomach, punishing him for his brief lapse in attention. Ah! There it was. Nappa had connected the dots. Of course, it would be Ajax. The entire battle had turned from a walk in the park to a genuine challenge the moment Ajax had entered the fray. Nappa's irritation transformed into a grudging recognition of Ajax's tactical acumen. So, his guess had been right after all. Ajax had indeed become the linchpin of the defense, countering his attacks to provide the rest with an opportunity to regroup. Only now did it dawn on him that Ajax had knowingly chosen to tank the brunt of his volcanic explosion to pin him down, despite being fully aware that he would start with such an opening move. All this was executed with the sole purpose of securing a window for the others to safely retreat to a distance beyond harm's reach. As his chaotic battle with Ajax continued, Nappa felt a subtle telekinetic force settle over him. Nappa cursed under his breath at the white midget. While this might have been a mere inconvenience when he had fought against the others, dealing with it while in combat with Ajax was a whole other story. Almost immediately, Nappa felt the invisible force that sought to restrict his every action intensify. Then, with almost perfect synchrony, Ajax landed 2 rapid strikes almost simultaneously on his bare stomach. He grunted in pain. Just as Nappa regained his bearings, he registered another incoming strike, this one aglow with energy. Reacting with the slightest margin, Nappa managed to deflect the attack, redirecting it away from his person. Though the strike never made physical contact with the ground, Nappa could sense its energy obliterating the earth beside him. He knew it. That had been pinpoint impact. Content to have finally evaded pinpoint impact for once, Nappa found his satisfaction short-lived as his retaliation strike was rudely interrupted by 2 blasts ramming themselves into his face, courtesy of 3 eyes and the white midget. Simultaneously, he can see the Namekian charging something rather ominous on his fingertips, and the bald idiot conjuring that energy sawblade attack. Not to be outdone, even Gohan had a crackling yellow orb poised between his fingers on his forehead. Bracing himself, Nappa crossed his arms, deflecting Ajax's subsequent barrage of strikes. Okay, this was definitely not great. The combination of telekinetic interference, precise energy strikes, the looming threat of dangerous energy attacks, and the constant presence of Ajax had genuinely suppressed him. For a warrior who thrived on dominating and overpowering his enemies, the feeling of being suppressed was both unfamiliar and infuriating. Feeling the pressure mounting, Nappa knew he had to act decisively. Something had to give, or he risked being overwhelmed. He had to remove a few of the extras from the battle. These thoughts raced through Nappa's mind in the blink of an eye before Nappa made his first move. Rather than opting for retreat, the Scion general gritted his teeth and advanced, absorbing the force of Ajax's powerful blows that slammed into his torso, all in exchange for a singular opportunity for retaliation. His hands moved with lightning speed, grabbing Ajax's head firmly. Fueled by adrenaline, Nappa crashed his head into Ajax. Once, twice, and then a third time. Nappa hoped the headbutt did something because Ajax's head proved to be harder than he had anticipated. Capitalizing on the fleeting opening, Nappa resumed his assault. He opened his jaws wide, revealing a powerful energy blast within the cavity of his mouth that he had been charging for some time. Breaker Cannon. A searing torrent of energy tore from Nappa's throat, hurtling downwards toward Ajax and forcefully driving the young warrior to the ground. The beam continued its descent, drilling Ajax into the earth and forming a seemingly bottomless hole that extended downward into darkness. Nappa halted the attack. He had to hurry. While that attack would have vaporized any of the other extras, Nappa knew he didn't have long before Ajax recovered and mounted his counteroffensive. Without hesitation, Nappa sprang into action. Instincts guiding him, he narrowly dodged a spiraling beam of something unleashed by the Namekian that whizzed past him. Immediately afterward, he smoothly slid beneath the menacing energy sawblade attack conjured by the bald idiot. Nappa narrowed his eyes. Those sawblades were potential kill shots, proved to be harder to evade than the Namekian's beam, and seemed to charge with alarming speed. He had to prioritize neutralizing the bald idiot first because, believe it or not, he's the primary threat. Nappa's focus sharpened on Krillin. Nappa transformed into a streak of motion as he zoomed across the battlefield, leaving a trail of crackling lightning in his wake. He seamlessly weaved in and out of a barrage of laser beams and energy attacks that descended upon him like torrential rain. In a bold move, Nappa crossed his arms and charged straight through Gohan's Masenko. The Scion warrior closed the distance in an instant, honing in on the immediate threat, Krillin. Before anyone could intervene, Nappa seized Krillin in a tight embrace, allowing the crackling electricity from his own body to course through the bold warrior. Then, Nappa turned to the rest of his enemies, strategically positioning Krillin as a human shield. As anticipated, the barrage stopped. Taking a moment to fry the bald idiot a little, Nappa swiftly redirected his focus towards Kairatsu and flashed towards him, simultaneously releasing the slightly smoking Krillin mid-air. Krillin fell and crashed into the ground, twitching and somehow still conscious, but in great pain. Kairatsu's face twisted with fear, a sense of déjà vu enveloping him as Nappa closed in on him menacingly. The telekinetic warrior vividly remembered the result of the Scion's prior assault on him as clearly as the back of his hand. If he couldn't dodge it then, he certainly couldn't dodge it now. Somehow, Kairatsu didn't think Nappa would stop at a clothesline this time. Regardless, he concentrated all his energy on strengthening his telekinesis in a desperate bid to slow Nappa down as his last defiant act. Just as Nappa neared Kairatsu, the ground erupted in a spectacular display of energy, and Ajax materialized before Nappa. In a singular motion, Ajax unleashed a brutal hammer strike, slamming Nappa away from Kairatsu. The force of the blow sent Nappa hurtling through the air, his body crashing into the unforgiving ground with a dull boom, creating a plume of dirt that billowed upwards. Ajax did not look good. The majority of his outer GI had been disintegrated by the blast and blood seeped from his mouth. Ajax stood, visibly panting and trembling from the damage inflicted by Nappa's single most powerful key attack. The Z fighters, witnessing the exchange, experienced a renewed surge of hope. Despite his injuries, Ajax had successfully intervened, granting a crucial moment of reprieve from Nappa's relentless onslaught.
Distanz. Distanz.
That one's on me, but do your best to keep your F***king distance. Ajax urgently commanded as he descended with a drop kick to re-engage Nappa. Adhering to Ajax's command, Gohan swiftly moved to Krillin's side. Krillin, we need to get you further from the fight, Gohan urged. With a careful yet firm grip, he helped Krillin to his feet. Coughing and spasming from the lingering effects of the electricity, Krillin gritted his teeth, allowing himself to be dragged away from the battle.
Stern, Stern, Stern.
Following that intense exchange, the minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness as the fight between Ajax and Nappa settled into an uneasy equilibrium. A deep chill coursed down everyone's spines as they witnessed the non-stop exchange of blows. All of them had sensed the stark contrast between the current battle and their previous encounter with Nappa. During the first battle, before Ajax had arrived, Nappa had been a boisterous presence, chattering away and half-focused on imparting his combat wisdom to Gohan. However, in the current battle, Nappa's demeanor had changed. There was no smile. There was no banter. From the very beginning of the battle to the present moment, except for his initial attack, Nappa had not uttered a single word. This time, Nappa was going for the kill. As the fight continued, it became increasingly apparent to everyone that both combatants were wearing each other down under the unrelenting pace of the extended battle. Ajax, in particular, had borne the full weight of Nappa's assault. His resilience had been the linchpin, enduring blow after blow, even the ones directed at the Z fighters. In return, the Z fighters had bombarded Nappa at the slightest opportunity. However, none of the Z fighters could ignore the signs that Ajax was reaching the limit of his endurance. The toll of the fight decorated Ajax's body like abstract art, and he seemed to be teetering on the brink of exhaustion. Though Nappa didn't look much better, the realization still sent waves of apprehension through their ranks. They were acutely aware that without Ajax, Nappa would have overwhelmed them all long ago. Without warning, a colossal and blinding beam of light erupted from Nappa's hands, engulfing Ajax, and seemingly carrying him into distance unknown. A stunned silence settled in the wake of the blinding beam of energy that had spirited Ajax away into the distance. In unison, the Z fighters' collective gazes turned back to the snarling figure of Nappa, now unburdened by Ajax's presence for the second time in the course of the chaotic battle. The realization of Ajax's sudden disappearance sent a collective chill down their spines. Nappa confronted their gazes head-on. The initial breaker cannon hadn't managed to eradicate Ajax the first time, and Nappa doubted it would fare differently the second time, especially since he had prioritized blunt force and distance over sheer intensity for this iteration. Honestly, he just wanted the little pain in his ass as far away from him as possible. From what he knew of Ajax's physical stats, Nappa calculated with his 2,500 IQ mind that he had bought approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds until Ajax returns. 30 seconds of freedom. 30 seconds to kill everyone here.
Except Gohan.
During all of this, Vegeta continued to lean against his rock, his surroundings entirely unaffected by the battle. His scouter, however, began to emit a series of beeps, alerting him to an incoming energy signature. Vegeta opened his eyes, looking at the scouter's display. As the numbers danced across the screen, Vegeta's eyebrow arched in mild surprise at the magnitude of the approaching power before a self-assured smirk spread across his face. So, this was Kakarot, the so-called hero, weighing in at just slightly above 4,000. How disappointing. Looks like the native brat wasn't as clairvoyant as he claimed to be.
Nappa.
Another energy signature will arrive within a few minutes, slightly over 4,000. Defeat the stragglers first, so they do not gang up on you. Without looking at Vegeta, Nappa acknowledged the order with a backward thumbs up. 25 seconds left. Nappa blurred out of sight with a flash and a crackle of electricity. Chapter 48. Just one more makes all the difference. In the distance, Ajax lurched himself forcefully out of the trajectory of the blast, his chest heaving with exertion. Ajax had deduced that Nappa had no lethal intent with that blast. The distinctive lack of searing heat and its surprising concussive nature sets it apart from your typical ki blasts. It was clear that Nappa's primary objective was not to inflict harm but rather to have Ajax stay the hell away. Less damage blast or not, the recent exchanges had exacted a substantial toll on him. While he had been careful to avoid any potentially lethal blows, he had still endured what seemed like an endless series of attacks. Individually, Nappa's strikes may not have been anything to write home about, for him at least, but the cumulative damage was pushing him to his limit even with his body working furiously to adapt to the sustained injuries. In short, he was F*King exhausted. At the current moment, Ajax found himself relying more on the power of his ki than the physical strength of his body to move. Also, he had to say, this *T was more demanding than running a sub-6 minute mile. Hurts more too. With the utmost speed he could summon, Ajax soared backward, putting considerable distance between himself and the dissipating blast. Truth was, he had intentionally ridden the beam a bit further than strictly necessary to grant Nappa a few extra precious moments alone with the Z fighters. Yes, you heard that right. Admittedly, the tactic sounded absolutely terrible when voiced out loud, but for events to unfold as he needed them to beyond the Saiyan invasion, sacrifice was unavoidable. Specifically, he needed Kairatsu to die. Unfortunately, this was the price that needed to be paid for the sake of ensuring a specific individual's survival. Ajax had already weighed the relative priorities of each member that Nappa would target. Strategically, Piccolo was relatively secure, as Nappa would likely spare Piccolo until he extracted the crucial details about the Dragon Balls from him. Gohan was also safe, for obvious reasons. This meant that Nappa would target Krillin, Tien, and Kairatsu. Of the three, Krillin had been momentarily incapacitated by electricity, rendering him temporarily non-threatening to Nappa and effectively taking him out of the immediate line of fire. Tien, despite his formidable skills, lacked the telekinetic abilities that had proven to be a pain in Nappa's ass. If Ajax accurately read Nappa's priorities, the Saiyan general would likely focus on neutralizing Kairatsu first to eliminate the most significant threat. If this is the case, then all Ajax needed to do to accomplish his objective was to provide Nappa with the time he required. Midway back, Ajax sensed Kairatsu's energy signature expanding staggeringly, not unlike a star moments before going supernova. In the distance, Ajax saw a tremendous detonation, and as the echoes of the explosion faded into nothing, so did Kairatsu's energy signature. Ah, the Crane School's self-detonation technique. Sorry Kairatsu, we'll wish you back with Purunga soon, but your sacrifice was necessary in order for Piccolo to live. As the battlefield came into view, Ajax immediately observed multiple Tiens valiantly attempting to impede the relentless force that was Nappa. However, their efforts seemed futile as Nappa, like an unstoppable juggernaut, bulldozed through their ranks with sheer brute strength, paying little heed to the barrage of ki attacks hurled his way. Behind Nappa was a grim trail of dissipating Tien clones. Ajax's eyes sharpened. Goku was arriving soon, Kairatsu was gone, and Nappa was also on his last legs. All his objectives had been completed. He had successfully stalled Nappa for long enough. It was time. Nappa's ass was his. Figuratively speaking. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Ajax accelerated toward Nappa. Surprisingly, even with the chaos around him, Nappa had somehow sensed Ajax's approach and shifted just in time to confront the incoming Ajax. Ajax's momentum carried him straight into Nappa, his fist colliding fiercely with Nappa's arms. The air trembled as the two powerful forces clashed, each vying for supremacy. You arrived a whole 7 seconds later than I estimated, Nappa declared smugly. Ha, so this guy was timing him? Wow. Well, you have weird nipples. Ajax shot back. The F***CK did you just say to me? Nappa thundered, eyes widening in offense as his temper flared like wildfire. Ha. Perfect. Let those eyes widen even more. Solar flare. A brilliant flash erupted, shrouding the battlefield in a blinding burst of light. F***CK me. Nappa cursed, instinctively shielding his eyes from the searing light, caught once again in the same trap. As he reared back, he defensively curled into a protective ball, anticipating a frontal assault. However, instead of a direct confrontation, Ajax maneuvered behind Nappa. Taking advantage of the Scion's temporary blindness, Ajax wrapped one hand around Nappa's tail with an iron grip. That won't work. Piccolo's telepathic scream echoed in Ajax's mind. We've already tried that. Ajax ignored Piccolo and tightened his grip on Nappa's tail even further, his muscles flexing with calculated strength. He knew that fact better than anyone. In fact, he had known of it long before Piccolo even existed as a notion in Piccolo Sr.'s head. Besides, he wasn't attempting to paralyze Nappa. Rather, he was preemptively neutralizing the possibility of a potentially greater threat. He's permanently removing Great Ape Nappa from the equation before it had the chance to manifest itself. Exerting tremendous force, Ajax ruthlessly tore Nappa's entire tail from its place, blood splattering across his face as he did so. Caught off guard by the sudden and brutal amputation, Nappa roared in agonizing pain and fury. Ajax discarded the torn tail and wasted no time assuming a battle stance, his hands gathered at his waist. A radiant blue glow illuminated his face, heralding the arrival of the single most iconic technique within the Dragon Ball universe. Kamehameha. Ajax's voice resonated with power as the intense blue energy wave shot forth from his hands, barreling forward with incredible force. It struck Nappa's back head-on and carried him downward through the air, crashing violently into the ground. The battlefield trembled beneath the force of the Kamehameha, with dust and debris swirling endlessly into the air as the beam persisted, keeping Nappa firmly pinned against the ground. What the F***CK are you all waiting for? Blast him. Fire, fire, fire. Ajax's snapped his command at the other Z fighters. Though the sheer brutality had left them standing dumbly in stunned silence, Ajax's scream had jolted them into action. Tien, face filled with hatred and fury, was the first to respond. He roared as 2 additional limbs sprouted from his back, having activated the 4 Witches technique. With 4 hands forming 2 triangles, Tien unleashed his full-powered attack twice. Kikaho. The other Z fighters immediately followed suit in synchrony. Energy blasts of varying colors and intensities erupted from their outstretched hands, converging on the fallen Nappa. Explosive breath cannon.
Kamehameha. Mazenko.
The air seared as 5 brilliant beams of energy converged with impeccable precision, joining Ajax's earlier Kamehameha and collectively homing in on the exact location where Nappa had been forcefully pressed into the ground. As the beams collided with the crater, a mesmerizing kaleidoscope of colors blossomed from the cataclysmic explosion, with vibrant hues of blue, yellow, and white intertwining. Ajax touched down, sinking to one knee out of utter exhaustion. His body seemed unsettlingly unresponsive, as though it had slipped from his control. In the periphery of his vision, Tien, too, collapsed onto the ground, his ki levels dangerously depleted. Ajax grimaced. Tien had always been the voice of caution when it came to the use of the Kikaho. It was Tien who had repeatedly emphasized the importance of not utilizing this technique in prolonged bursts given the overwhelming strain it imposed on one's life force. However, in a great twist of irony, Tien himself had discarded his own advice in the heat of battle, pushing himself to his limit and perhaps beyond it. Although, because of Kairotsu, Ajax was pretty sure Tien had done it intentionally. Ajax gritted his teeth as Tien's ki continued to dwindle and splutter to feeble flickers. Ajax understood with a heavy heart that for the canon to progress into the next arc with the alterations he sought to make, sacrifices were inevitable. Much like Goku's death had been pivotal to ensure the Scion invasion was not a mere game over, Kairotsu's death played a comparable role, but it weighed heavily on Ajax's conscience nonetheless. Tien's death, however, was different from Kairotsu's in that Tien's death was not strictly necessary. As guilt and undercurrents of bitterness overcame him, Ajax averted his gaze, feeling the burden on his shoulders grow heavier. While his heart implored him to aid his mentor, his rationality urged him to prioritize the threat and take acceptable losses as they came. They have the Dragon Balls for a reason, after all. Nevertheless, the bitter taste in his mouth persisted. Ajax shook his head vigorously, dispelling the swirling thoughts that threatened to cloud his focus. He can't act on raw emotions in battle. It was precisely such impulsiveness that had led Tien to his dire situation in the first place. Nappa's defeat was still unconfirmed, and none of his inner conflicts would matter if the entire team died in the end. Ajax struggled to his feet, stumbling. While the extended battle had depleted his ki to almost nothing and his ki force field felt thinner than he would have preferred, he had enough in the tank for one final strike. Thank God pinpoint impact relied more on ki control than sheer ki expenditure. Silver linings and all that. The remains of Ajax's ki covered his fist. Though the smoke and debris still lingered, Ajax could not afford to wait any longer. The Z fighters needed a decisive victory since there was always the possibility that Nappa was biding his time. And Ajax was not inclined to grant Nappa more time. Ajax charged into the dissipating smoke to deliver the finishing blow. As he entered the dust cloud, Ajax felt Tien's ki fizzle out into nothing behind him. Soon enough, Ajax was met with what he had suspected all along. Nappa, against the odds, was still alive. The Scion warrior resembled a mere shadow of his former self. One eye tightly shut, an arm dangling limply, body scorched and battered, all while kneeling on one knee. Nappa appeared to be on the brink of collapse, but he hadn't, a testament to his resilience. Time decelerated to a crawl as Ajax's fist closed in on its target, the promise of victory approaching inch by inch. However, in the fleeting moment before impact, Nappa's mouth opened wide, revealing that the Scion general had been amassing a colossal blast within it all along. It was at this precise moment that Ajax realized he ked up badly. Nappa unleashed his attack, and the massive breaker cannon instantly consumed Ajax with great ferocity. The sheer force of the energy not only dispersed any lingering smoke but also propelled Ajax violently away from Nappa. Clenching his fists, Nappa flexed his energy, causing the beam to explode in an earth-shattering display. The ground beneath them quaked for miles on end, and the air became filled with the thick, acrid scent of burnt flesh and smoldering debris. Enveloped in the literal epicenter of the explosion, Ajax fell bonelessly to the ground, sprawled motionless amid the desolate, scorched battlefield a short distance away. His clothing was almost entirely stripped away, rendering him nearly naked and painfully vulnerable. Second- and third-degree burns formed a macabre mosaic across his body like the inkblots of a Rorschach test. Ajax is fairly certain he's dying. The wave of spreading numbness that left his body completely unresponsive was not exactly a sign of good health. The encroaching darkness on his vision wasn't auspicious either. In all honesty, the concussive force from the explosion had, in all probability, wrought more havoc upon Ajax than the beam itself. The shockwave had coursed through him like a malevolent force, tearing through his insides and breaking many things that Ajax had preferred intact. As he teetered on the precipice between consciousness and the abyss of death, Ajax found himself reflecting on the cruel irony that fate had dealt him. Internal injuries. Of course, the damage that would kill him at the end was one of the few things he couldn't develop a resistance to under Kami's tutelage. Hovering on the brink of death, Ajax strained his dimming sight to focus on Nappa, who was busy charging another destructive blast in his mouth. Nappa, seemingly convinced that Ajax was either dead or incapable of further battle, paid no heed to him. It was a very reasonable assumption, given that Ajax couldn't even determine the target that Nappa was aiming that blast towards. Even with Death Sensei resting a hand on his shoulder, Ajax did not panic. He wasn't fearful of his looming death. He was not desperate at his imminent failure to safeguard Piccolo. Ajax was calm, perhaps even unusually so. Why? Because Ajax had lied. He didn't have 2 senzu beans on him. He had 3. Ajax bit down into the senzu bean hidden in his mouth, and he exploded into action with incredible speed. As he did so, the senzu bean worked its magic instantly, dispelling all injuries and banishing the looming specter of death. Almost immediately, Ajax was fully restored and operating at full capacity. Nappa, in the middle of charging his attack, caught onto the unexpected movement remarkably quickly and whipped his head around to confront the unexpected threat. Or at least, he tried to do so. As if Ajax would just grant him such a luxury. There was a reason why Ajax had not utilized his density manipulation to any significant degree throughout the entire battle. He had been withholding that technique as a secret asset precisely for crucial moments like this. Even as he blurred forward, Ajax channeled his energy and instantly transformed the airspace surrounding Nappa into a solid mass as unyielding as stone. Midway through its turn to confront Ajax, Nappa's head came to a staggering halt, the density forcing the Scion general into a temporary stasis. Though Nappa's sheer strength allowed him to break free from the ethereal restraint a scant second later, it was far too late. Nappa's eyes widened, reflecting within them a spectrum of emotions. Shock, realization, and finally horror. Ajax, now within melee range, punched forward with blistering momentum directly at the just-released, still accelerating energy beam from Nappa's mouth. Lesson 4. And. Ajax triumphantly roared as his punch collided with the energy attack, causing it to detonate mere inches away from Nappa's face. Moments later, in a stance remarkably similar to All Might's iconic United States of Smash, Ajax's fist burst through the explosion and descended upon Nappa, smashing into his jaw with a cataclysmic force that echoed like a thunderclap. Pinpoint impact. The explosive momentum and force of Ajax's pinpoint impact sent Nappa's head slamming into the unforgiving ground, creating a substantial crater upon striking it. The impact was so powerful that the sheer force generated a mini-tornado as the vortex of energy swirled outward from the epicenter. As the battlefield shuddered with the impact, Vegeta tensed, rising from his previously leaning position. His eyes narrowed in response to the colossal blow delivered to his comrade. It was evident that even he was uncertain about Nappa's ability to withstand such an attack in his condition. Slowly, the wind began to dissipate, revealing the outcome of the fierce battle. In the clearing air, Ajax stood over Nappa, his breath heavy with the lingering effects of adrenaline. Both Vegeta and Ajax shifted their gaze downward to where Nappa lay sprawled on the ground in a spread eagle position. His eyes were closed, his body covered in burns, and he was unmistakably unconscious. The once mighty Scion general, now battered and broken, lay motionless on the scorched battlefield, with the subtle rise and fall of his chest providing the sole evidence of his life. Ajax's keen ki sense, finely tuned by Kami's rigorous training, confirmed what his eyes perceived. Nappa was utterly defeated, his energy depleted, and his body rendered incapable of further movement. Though one hand was slightly injured from punching through Nappa's breaker cannon, Ajax raised it high in triumph and let his victorious scream echo across the battered battlefield. As Ajax calmed down from his momentary exhilaration, he bared his teeth in a defiant stance towards Vegeta. Ajax was well aware of the power at Vegeta's command, and despite the hard-won victory over Nappa, he knew that a direct clash with the Prince of All Science would only wipe away the progress he had made thus far. Vegeta, tilting his head, observed Ajax with an intrigued expression, a spark of curiosity flickering in his eyes. Interesting. Chapter 49. Fake it till you make it. Ajax could sense Goku's distinctive energy approaching, growing closer with each passing moment. By his estimate, Goku should arrive within the next 2 minutes, so he just needed to hold off Vegeta for that brief period. It was a task far easier said than done since the power asymmetry between them meant it would take far less than 2 minutes for Vegeta to kill him. Ajax swallowed hard as he stared at Vegeta, acutely aware that the next 2 minutes were one of many moments that could decide everything. Congratulations, you've bested Nappa. It seems your species isn't entirely worthless after all. Vegeta wore a wry smile and began to slowly clap his hands mockingly, an applause that sounded more like a backhanded compliment than any genuine praise. Abruptly, Vegeta's smile dropped from his face. However, you're still far from being a match for me.
No shit, Sherlock.
Ajax thought as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Though he stood firm against the menacing pressure that emanated from Vegeta, he could feel his heart racing within his chest and pounding in his ears. All the while, Vegeta's gaze penetrated him with unsettling intensity. How did you manage to heal yourself so thoroughly? Vegeta was curious. The speed and efficiency at which the native had restored himself to peak condition was unnatural. Even the most advanced, absolutely cutting-edge healing pods available anywhere in the universe could not hope to match a pitiful fraction of what had been demonstrated. He should know, he had spent more time in them than he cared to admit. Oh, we've got a nifty little thing on this planet. It's called none of your goddamn business. Ajax was very pleased his voice remained steady throughout. Fake it till you make it, baby. Now, contrary to what most would have anticipated at this point, Ajax had not been dishonest about Korin's supply. The truth of the matter was, while it had been undeniably true that Korin only had 2 senzu beans available at the time of the invasion, it was also equally true that Korin had granted Ajax 3 beans. Nearly a full year earlier, Korin, recognizing Ajax's potential and commendable feat of surviving the ultra-divine water, had generously gifted him a senzu bean as a symbol of support. Ajax never ate it. At the time, Ajax had very seriously contemplated using the senzu bean as a means to recover from the ultra-divine water's ravaging aftereffects. However, he had ultimately made the calculated risk to forego the immediate remedy, opting to trust in his body's adaptive capabilities. It was a gamble that paid off, as, by the time he reached the midway point to the lookout, he had successfully adapted to and overcame the water's searing aftereffects. Now, in the heat of the battle against Nappa, Ajax fully reaped the rewards of the senzu bean, leveraging it as the secret trump card that he had unleashed at the most opportune moment. That being said, Ajax had initially planned to defeat Nappa without resorting to this failsafe. He had originally intended to keep the Senzu Bean in reserve as a second wind for Goku during his inevitable showdown with Vegeta, a usage he would openly admit to be more optimal than on him. However, Nappa's unexpected strength had forced his hand, leaving him with no alternative but to deploy his failsafe prematurely. Despite deviating from his original strategy, Ajax had no regrets using the Senzu Bean, since he had only managed to survive because of it. Ajax tensed, his focus immediately snapping back into place and his thoughts instantly banished, as Vegeta laughed at his response and advanced slowly toward him. Fair enough. It was indeed none of my business. Underneath Ajax, Nappa stirred, coughing and sputtering as he struggled his way back to consciousness. His bleary eyes instinctively honed in on Ajax, who stood above him, directly in his line of sight. As Nappa recognized Ajax, a surge of anger twisted his features. What is this healing bullshit? This is unfair. No, you were just sloppy, Nappa, Vegeta rebuked with disdain and shot a disappointed glare at his fallen comrade. You did not confirm your kill and simply assumed he had died when you knew they possessed an unknown healing ability. They committed no dishonor, as they had clearly demonstrated these capabilities during the 2-hour break. It shouldn't have taken you by surprise. Even if they hadn't, it wasn't their responsibility to explain their abilities, nor showcase them to you. Vegeta redirected his attention to the remaining Z fighters, Gohan, Piccolo, and Krillin, and scoffed at their expressions. Following Vegeta's lead, Ajax briefly glanced back. The trio stood together, their expressions reflecting a mix of awe and disbelief at the unexpected victory over Nappa, a foe they had believed insurmountable without Goku's intervention. Piccolo was still in a protective stance in front of Gohan, as though shielding him from an imminent threat, remarkably similar to the way he had done in canon. The green-skinned warrior's antennae twitched in heightened alertness, while Gohan peered out from next to Piccolo's legs. Ajax couldn't help but ponder whether Piccolo would have met his canonical fate had he not consumed that Senzu Bean when he did. Vegeta's gaze snapped to Nappa, who had started attempting to rise feebly. Nappa, hurry up and return. God, I wish I could Vegeta, but they got me good. I can barely move a single muscle right now. Nappa coughed and spasmed in pain. Ajax, sensing a potential opportunity, planted a single foot on Nappa's chest, applying light but firm pressure to keep the large scion pinned to the ground. Simultaneously, Ajax raised a hand, his palm facing downward toward Nappa. An ominous glow cast shadows across Ajax's features as a formidable energy blast materialized on his palm, swirling and crackling with power. Though nameless, the attack was clearly more than capable of ending Nappa's life. I have a better idea. You back off, Vegeta, or Nappa dies. Vegeta narrowed his eyes in response to Ajax's ultimatum. The Scion Prince meticulously assessed the situation, his gaze flickering between Nappa's battered form and Ajax's resolute stance. Decision made, Vegeta countered the threat by presenting one of his own, aiming an even more potent energy orb at Ajax and Nappa. Ajax hid an internal grimace. His ploy to buy time had proven less effective than he had hoped. He had intended to use Nappa as a bargaining chip to create a temporary standoff, but he should have known better than to expect leniency from a Scion as ruthless as Vegeta. While the Scions had displayed a far better relationship than in canon, he had either overestimated their camaraderie or underestimated their cruelty. Regardless of which, exposing his bluff now would be disastrous. After a brief moment of contemplation, Ajax expanded the key orb in his hand, the blast growing in both size and intensity. As he did so, Ajax's mind raced, searching for a solution. Contrary to Ajax's expectations, it was Nappa who summoned the inner strength to speak up and break the standoff. His voice, though weakened and strained, reached all relevant parties with remarkable clarity. Don't worry about me, Vegeta. I know you remember what I taught you about hostages. Do it, my prince. Consider it my final lesson to you. Ajax was genuinely surprised by Nappa's defiant declaration and glanced down at the Scion general. Nappa had begun to grasp at Ajax's foot still resting on his chest with his one remaining good arm. His fingers clawed at Ajax's boot as if attempting to anchor Ajax's leg to himself. Due to Nappa's injuries and lack of strength, his grip on Ajax's foot resembled more of his hand flopping onto Ajax's boots than any real hold. However, the symbolic gesture was not lost on anyone. Nappa, in his final moments, sought to assert control over his destiny, aiming to face death alongside his enemy by bringing Ajax down with him. Vegeta froze at the unexpected words and gesture, his body locking in place. His visage twisted with a mixture of conflicting and indecipherable emotions as he stared into Nappa's eyes. After an infinitesimal moment that felt like an eternity, Vegeta raised his hands once more, intentions clear. The energy within him surged, ready to extinguish the lives of both Nappa and Ajax with cold efficiency. Thank you for your service, Commander General Nappa. You are now honorably discharged. May you depart with pride, Vegeta declared with cold and detached finality. Without a moment's pause, he unleashed his enormous blast, a torrent of energy roaring toward Nappa and Ajax with indomitable force. Ajax's instincts kicked into action as he discarded his attack and blurred away from the impending blast with lightning speed, effortlessly tearing himself away from Nappa's feeble grasp. In the blink of an eye, he had left Nappa behind, allowing Vegeta's attack to continue racing forward, eager to consume everything in its path. As Ajax distanced himself, he witnessed the energy wave collide catastrophically with Nappa, observing the Scion General reduced to bare bones, then to dust. As the blast surged into the distance, it left only an enormous trench in its wake. Or, at least, that was what would have happened had Ajax not needed Nappa alive too. Following the explosion, Vegeta's gaze diverted sharply to the side where Ajax floated, slightly above the trajectory of the blast. In his grasp, Ajax held onto Nappa by his black underwear armor, the once mighty Scion General swaying limply in Ajax's grip like wet laundry. You're giving me a wedgie. Nappa added awkwardly after a moment of significant hesitation. As if burned, Ajax immediately dropped Nappa like a hot potato and hastily wiped his palms on what remained of his pants. Oof. Nappa mumbled into the dirt where he had face-planted. Ajax touched down beside Nappa. He was not about to repeat Goku's mistake and carelessly throw a vulnerable Nappa next to Vegeta like the canonical timeline. Although this Nappa wasn't paralyzed like his counterpart was in canon, Ajax didn't get this far by taking unnecessary risks. It's best he stayed close to this idiot to ensure Vegeta didn't kill him. So you were bluffing, Vegeta declared with a stoic air, his voice just a tad too cool and composed. Ajax raised a skeptical eyebrow. How did you know I was bluffing? How did you know he was bluffing? Nappa mumbled, still face down. The ensuing silence was deafening. Vegeta's scouter beeped, breaking the extended silence, and flashed data across its visor. Granted a timely escape from the inquiries, Vegeta crossed his arms and turned stoically toward the direction of the approaching power, his eyes tracing the energy signature's trajectory. He staunchly ignored both Nappa and Ajax's questioning looks. Mentally, Ajax permitted himself a subtle sigh of relief. Vegeta choosing to sidestep the question by biding his time until Goku's arrival suited Ajax perfectly. Whether Vegeta declined to answer due to seeing it as a perceived admission of weakness, an assault on his pride, an affront to his masculinity, or whatever other reason, Ajax gave 0F***ck's about it. He was here to stall, and it was mission accomplished, as far as he was concerned. Ajax was definitely saving this as potential blackmail material against Vegeta in the coming years though. In due course, Ajax mentally marked off one more item from the master plan as his eyes focused on a figure at the horizon. Goku had finally arrived. Chapter 50, The Hero is Always Fashionably Late. Vegeta's stern gaze returned frontward as Goku materialized beside Ajax, aligning himself shoulder to shoulder with the young Earthling. In this fated encounter, the two formidable titans locked eyes, sizing each other like predators as their piercing gazes meticulously searched for chinks in the other's metaphorical armor. After a moment of silent assessment, Goku subtly tilted his head, casting a brief, inquisitive glance toward Ajax. It was clear that Goku was silently inquiring for a status update after the intense confrontation with Nappa and Vegeta. It's been a long 15 minutes, Goku. Kairatsu and Tien have fallen, and I was forced to eat a senzu bean initially reserved for you. Gohan, however, is largely unscathed, Ajax responded, understanding the unspoken inquiry in Goku's gaze. Goku's expression hadn't been cheerful to start with, and it became even more somber as Ajax recounted the events of the past 15 minutes. Goku nodded solemnly as he absorbed the information, his gaze scanning the battlefield for confirmation of Ajax's words. His eyes started with a downward flicker towards the fallen Nappa, then spanned the distance to Yamcha, then further to Tien lying face down, and finally lingering on the trio of Gohan, Piccolo, and Krillin. He scanned the trio, meticulously checking their conditions. The entire battlefield observed in collective silence as Goku advanced with slow and deliberate steps toward Gohan. There were no interruptions as Goku knelt before his son.
Are you all right, Gohan?
I'm back. Gohan nodded fervently, unshed tears welling up in his eyes and threatening to spill. In an instant, he hugged Goku, wrapping his arms tightly around his father's neck. He took a deep breath, taking in the familiar scent. Goku rubbed Gohan's back in a rhythmic motion, the same way he'd always done whenever Gohan had run to him because of a nightmare. As he did so, Goku tenderly pressed his lips to Gohan's forehead. Within Gohan's tight embrace, Goku turned his head towards Piccolo and gave a nod of appreciation, acknowledging the role Piccolo had played in Gohan's life over the past year. I've been keeping tabs on what's happening in the past year through King Kai. Thanks for taking care of Gohan, Piccolo. I'm raising him for world domination, Piccolo snapped back brusquely. Sure thing, buddy. I'm not your buddy. Krillin patiently waited his turn as he watched the exchange unfold, finally sharing a solemn nod with Goku as their eyes met. Having fought shoulder to shoulder through countless battles, experiencing both triumphs and losses together, their bond had long transcended the need for spoken words. They hadn't been friends their entire life for nothing. Not a single word passed between the two friends, yet in that simple exchange of nods, everything that needed to be said was communicated. The unspoken emotions, mutual trust, relief, understanding, and unwavering support. Having ensured the well-being of every fighter on the battlefield, Goku returned to the spot where Ajax had stood. The Scion hero radiated a calming aura as he walked back. Goku placed his hand on Ajax's shoulder gently, a simple gesture that offered more reassurance than any number of words ever could. Kami gave me updates on the battle. Good job. Goku gave Ajax's shoulder a gentle squeeze. I am here now. Let me handle the rest. Goku spoke those words with such unshakable confidence and sincerity that Ajax felt the tension in his body melting away almost unconsciously. After hours of being on high alert and navigating life and death situations, Ajax finally allowed himself to relax. A deep breath escaped him as the accumulated pressure on his shoulders finally slid off. Ajax's gaze lingered on Goku's broad back as Earth's strongest fighter took determined strides toward Vegeta. Ajax couldn't help but marvel at the aura enveloping Goku, the unmistakable presence of a main character, a hero among heroes. But it wasn't just confidence either. Yamcha had also exuded confidence, perhaps even more so than Goku, but he had sorely lacked the sheer presence that Goku had. Ajax pondered, wondering to himself if this was the quality that defined a main character from the rest, to instill confidence and hope solely through one's presence, irrespective of how overwhelming the adversary may be. Ajax felt like he was 5 again, fervently cheering for his heroes on the television screen as they fought with the fate of their world hanging in the balance. Ajax blinked. Was he having an All Might moment right now? There were some remarkable parallels between him now to when Deku had watched All Might's debut video. In Goku's presence, Ajax certainly felt as if everything would be miraculously okay, that the life-threatening struggles they just faced had been resolved, even though he was well aware that Goku would ultimately face defeat against Vegeta. In the interim, Goku and Vegeta's gazes clashed. The friction of their personalities and destinies colliding had infused the air with tension fitting for a confrontation where the fate of Earth was held in balance. So, you're Kakarot, Vegeta remarked, his tone oozing with authority and derision in equal measure. The so-called hero. I have never thought of myself as a hero. And my name is Son Goku, Goku corrected. You're a Scion, so your name is Kakarot. Goku frowned at the unexpected response. He found himself slightly taken aback by the seemingly petty insistence on addressing him by his Scion birth name, a name to which he felt no inherent connection to. It was a name burdened with a purpose, intent, history, and moral code that he inherently rejected. A year ago, Raditz had painted a picture that the Scions were gung-ho about respect and honor, but at this moment, Goku could not perceive any of those qualities. Typically, he would let such comments slide without a second thought. Normally, he wouldn't be bothered in the least. However, today was anything but typical. The fate of his home was on the line, his friends were dead, his family was in imminent danger, and he, excuse his language, was not in the mood for petty bullshit. You want to be petty, Vegeta? Fine, two can play at that game. So, you must be Vegeta then. No, it's Vegeta, you imbecile. And for a low class like you, refer to me by my proper title. I am your prince, Vegeta bristled, irritation weaving into every aspect of his face. Goku quipped back without missing a beat, oh my bad Prince Vagina. Goku had dropped his utterly ballsy jab with a level of audacity that had the entire battlefield instantly falling deathly silent. Vegeta's face transformed instantaneously, contorting into a mask of unbridled rage as a prominent vein throbbed on his forehead. What the F***ck did you just call me? Meanwhile, still spread eagle on the battlefield, Nappa erupted into boisterous laughter. His deep, booming guffaws echoed through the air, replacing the silence following Goku's bold remark. OHHHH, he called you Vajayjay. I don't know what Raditz was talking about, 'cause Kakarot got balls of pure steel. Big brass ones. Ahahaha. Shut the foo *k up Nappa. Vegeta regretted not vaporizing Nappa earlier. He really should have rid himself of the pain in his ass when the opportunity presented itself. Actually, what was he thinking? He could still do that right now. Goku tensed and discreetly adjusted his position, positioning Ajax and Nappa behind him. At the same time, he steered the conversation in a new direction. Why did you try to kill your comrade before? Don't you hold any regard for your allies? Nappa was incapacitated and taken hostage. A Scion warrior doesn't count on being rescued. On the battlefield, it's either victory or death. Vegeta's reply dripped with cold pragmatism as he crossed his arms after regaining his composure. Goku's body tensed at the callousness. His strong belief in the value of friendship had always guided his actions and often led to him extending mercy even when it might not have been warranted. Now, faced with Vegeta's ruthless philosophy, Goku felt rather compelled to voice his disapproval. I don't agree with that. Your agreement is irrelevant to me. Retorting with complete indifference, Vegeta began to tap his fingers against his arms in a sped-up and irritated cadence. Against my better judgment and every instinct I possess, I shall grant you and your offspring one final opportunity. We remain a rare breed, and unlike Raditz, a battle power of 4,000 meant you aren't entirely worthless. Goku's neutral countenance darkened as his displeasure deepened. What little of the vibrant energy that often defined him drained away and was replaced by stern resolve. My answer hasn't changed. Take your offer and shove it. Watch your tone. I am your prince. Your status is irrelevant to me. Ajax observed Goku's response with a quizzical tilt of his head, his interest piqued. Was it just him, or was there something different about Goku? Perhaps it was recency bias coloring his impressions, thanks Dragon Ball Super, but this version of Goku appeared notably more intense. Sassy? Where had the happy-go-lucky main character disappeared off to? The shonen energy? What on earth had happened? Across from everyone else, Vegeta ground his teeth, a visible vein throbbing on his forehead as his anger and frustration mounted. The Scion Prince began to channel the unbridled force of his power, causing the air around him to crackle and the very earth beneath him to tremble. Dirt and small rocks began to levitate, ensnared by the escalating intensity of his burgeoning energy. Ajax felt Vegeta's pressure crash into him almost like a physical force, prompting him to subtly readjust his posture to prevent him from being pushed backward, not unlike someone bracing against an unexpectedly strong wind. Meanwhile, Goku remained unbothered by Vegeta's power, instead beginning to raise his own energy to match the force exerted by the Scion Prince. The space between them snapped and popped with low-frequency booms, like that of distant thunder, as their auras collided, creating an invisible barrier that erupted in sparks at the point of contact. Vegeta's scouter began to beep urgently. The Scion Prince tore his gaze away from Goku for a moment, glancing at the readings, then back to Goku, only to immediately snap his attention back to the scouter in sheer disbelief. What does it say, Vegeta? Nappa bellowed from his downed position next to Ajax. Vegeta turned his disbelieving gaze toward Nappa, then toward Ajax, who now wore an incomparably smug smirk on his face. It's over 9,000. A mere low-class warrior. Unknown to Goku, the numerical evaluation of his power level had challenged the very foundation of hierarchy that had defined Scion society. For generations and generations, the talent of a Scion had been determined by the power they possessed at birth. This test, spanning countless generations, had consistently proven to be an accurate estimation of future battle prowess. And battle prowess was the cornerstone on which Scion nobility earned their right to rule, born the strongest, destined to become the strongest. Of course, every so often, there would be a rare genius who would defy the established hierarchy and leap a tier higher. However, never had there been anyone who had managed to ascend from the bottom to the very pinnacle, except for one sole exception, Bardock. Vegeta should know, since Raditz, that trash, had been assigned to him in the futile hopes that the worthless fool could somehow replicate his father's feat and develop his power to surpass his hierarchy. To no one's surprise, Raditz remained a low-class warrior. Vegeta observed Kakarot with narrowed eyes. Had Bardock's hierarchy-defying strength skipped Raditz altogether and chose Kakarot instead? While Vegeta pondered, Nappa's jaw hung agape at the revelation of Goku's staggering power level. Holy shit! Which dumbass dispatched a warrior with such latent potential off to this backwater planet? Goku shifted his body slightly towards the fallen Scion general. You're defeated and your role in this battle is over. Admit your defeat and leave this planet. I cannot abandon my prince. But you are no longer part of this battle, Goku insisted, determined to make his point despite Nappa's unwavering loyalty. Nappa sneaked a glance at Vegeta, catching a glimpse of Vegeta's neutral and dispassionate countenance. Despite the inscrutable facade, the Scion general seemed to glean something there. Fine, Nappa grumbled, his tone gruff yet accepting. Swear it on your Scion honor and pride. Unlike Goku, who might place trust in others more than he should, Ajax needed a more binding commitment. If Scion honor was truly paramount as they claimed it was, then swearing this oath would provide a more concrete reassurance, as much reassurance as a verbal promise could in any case. This time, Nappa directed his gaze fully at Vegeta, his eyes meeting those of the Scion Prince. Goku and Ajax turned their attention to Vegeta as well, in anticipation of the response from the Prince of all Scions. Contrary to his earlier pride and disdain, Vegeta adopted a solemn demeanor as he engaged in a moment of silent contemplation. After a pregnant pause, he finally spoke, "Will you honor the universal treaties regarding prisoners of war?" In perfect unison, Goku and Ajax exchanged puzzled glances, tilting their heads in confusion at the unfamiliar topic. Vegeta sighed in annoyance and impatiently clarified, "You are not to torture, kill, or humiliate any prisoners of war." "Yes," Goku affirmed immediately. Vegeta, satisfied with Goku's response, nodded at Nappa in curt acknowledgement. "Okay. You have my word, sworn upon my honor and pride as a Scion, that I shall no longer engage in any further battles on this planet unless commanded by my prince." Nappa quickly recited his vow. "Fair enough." Goku acknowledged Nappa's commitment with a simple yet firm nod. Breaking eye contact, Goku diverted his attention to the surrounding battlefield, scanning the area as he contemplated the next course of action. "Let's settle this somewhere else." Goku was determined not to involve anyone else in the impending fight. "Do as you wish, Kakarot. It won't make a difference," Vegeta replied with confidence. With that declaration, the two Scion warriors took off, their energy propelling them skyward and away from the battlefield below.